The universe often presents surprises that you don't expect. It can spin the wheel of life in any direction, killing and resurrecting, turning into angels or demons. And no one knows which side it will turn to you tomorrow. And that's what happened to Elizabeth, a police officer from the 5th District of the 7th State. The 24-year-old police officer and her colleagues participated in the arrest of a large gang of drug dealers. They worked on the case for several months and finally got on the trail. But something went wrong, and the main character felt the cold steel of a weapon on the back of her head. She had no chance at all. The sounds of gunfire disappeared. Everything became quiet and calm, and Elizabeth saw in front of her the distant image of her mother, who had passed away many years ago. The girl grew up without parents. Her hands reached forward on their own. The girl looked at her hand, then around, not understanding what had happened. She knew for sure that one of the shots was hers. The enemy had not missed. The young lady sat on a luxurious bed in the middle of the large hall, her long curls hanging down onto her half-naked shoulders. The mirror finally scared Elizabeth. In front of her stood a young girl of about 16, in a sexy costume that she once wore to a school play. The main character tried to figure out what happened to her and how she was able to deceive time. A bald old man entered the room. A man found an unconscious girl high in the mountains and brought her home. Her appearance enchanted him. Now he was waiting for a reward. Elizabeth had been involved in hand-to-hand combat since her school years, so after a few seconds, the owner of the house was knocked to the floor with one blow. The main character headed towards the exit. What she saw shocked the girl. She was standing on the balcony of a high tower. Dragons were flying past. Far below, small houses and horse-drawn carriages could be seen. The brain refused to perceive the situation. It was like the Middle Ages. The old man and the guard were catching up with the fugitive from behind. The servant received an order to seize the girl. Lightning flashed, and a moment later, Elizabeth realized that she could not move. An unknown force pressed her to the floor. The main character guessed that it might be magic. The owner of the castle turned out to be the famous Earl Baxter Smith. He was very angry and promised to deal with the ungrateful beauty. As a fighter, the old man sent the girl to the arena of the slave battle. The main character's rival was the invincible Joe, who repeatedly brought income to his master through victories in fights. Elizabeth was chained, and her movements were restricted. The judge announced the start of the tournament. Everyone wanted the death of the fragile but brave slave. The wrestler had no doubt about an easy victory and was the first to rush into attack. Daily training in the gym did not go to waste, and the policewoman easily dodged the blow. The girl grabbed her opponent's hand. The next moment, the opponent was lying on his shoulder blades. The audience was shocked. They could not understand how a strong man was suddenly defeated by a very young slave. Joe stood up, supported on all sides by the screaming crowd. The wrestler's second attack also ended in defeat. Luckily, Elizabeth saw a crack in the chain. The policewoman decided to take advantage of the pause while the enemy gathered his strength. The girl broke the iron chain with a sharp movement of her hands. Elizabeth's signature punch knocked out her opponent. Joe had no more strength to resist. Baxter noticed that the chain was broken and ordered the guards to detain their prey. The girl understood that she could not hesitate for a minute. To get to the wall, Elizabeth jumped on the shoulder of a defeated enemy. The hand reached the top. All that was left was to pull myself up. The main character managed to get up from the arena to the spectator stands. The count tried again to detain the fugitive. Having jumped on Smith's head, Elizabeth easily floated above the rows of astonished spectators. The girl didn't know that the slave battlefield was located on the upper floors of the trading castle, and it was almost impossible to escape from there. The height was at the level of the 10th floor of a metropolis. There was no way back. The guards were catching up with the fugitive. The guards were ready to capture the slave again. Having experienced the power of magic before, Elizabeth knew she had to act. The girl's only hope was the roof of a long carriage passing below. Elizabeth pushed off harder and jumped down. The main character understood that just one small mistake and she would crash into the cobblestones. The cart was already very close. We needed to group together. The third prince of the kingdom of Sylvania, Armando, along with his assistant Ray, was returning from a neighboring state. Suddenly, a loud crash forced the servants to stop the carriage. Having broken through the ceiling of the carriage, the main character landed right in front of the heir to the throne. The girl looked boldly at the stranger. The young man's keen eye noticed the sexy clothes and chain on the unexpected guest's neck, but most of all, he was struck by the stranger's open gaze. People gathered around the carriage and demanded that the runaway slave be handed over. The Count was the most indignant of all. He thirsted for revenge. Elizabeth snatched the small blade from the wagon master's sheath and held it to his throat, demanding that he give orders to leave her alone. Ray tried to protect his friend and master. Elizabeth was surprised that she attacked the prince himself. Armando gave the order, and the main character fulfilled her promise, returning the weapon to its owner. The prince was absolutely calm, and the policewoman's experience told her that he was not at all frightened by her threats. The young gentleman offered the girl to stay with him as a pawn, pretending to fulfill his desires. Elizabeth was forced to agree in order to understand the unfamiliar situation. The master gave his servant and assistant orders to calm the indignant pursuers. The crowd saw the third prince, and the unrest died down. Armando and the girl got out of the carriage. His Highness, in front of all those assembled, declared Elizabeth free from slavery for all time. The crew set off on their further journey, accompanied by the surprised glances of the spectators. Count Smith was the most indignant of all. The slave was almost in his hands, and he really wanted to take revenge on her for all his humiliations. Only in the evening did the travelers reach the palace. The maids were shocked by the appearance of the master, with a stranger in his arms. Elizabeth was happy. She finally got to take a bath. After the water procedures, the senior maid escorted the guest to the owner's apartments. The main character indignantly opened the door and looked into the mansion. The policewoman had not worn a long dress for a long time, so she inadvertently stepped on the hem. Unable to stay on her feet, Elizabeth flew forward with screams and a crash. The surprised prince was sitting on his bed with a book when his new girl landed next to him, with a noise, as he introduced her to all the inhabitants of the palace. The main character was very upset. Armando put the book aside and looked at the guest. Elizabeth categorically refused to be the savior's woman. The agreement was made only as a distraction. The prince brought the girl up to date with the events. In the current situation in the palace, the only safe place for her was next to him. Refusing to sleep on the small sofa, the main character climbed onto the bed. After a busy day, the girl fell asleep almost instantly. The dreams were different. Elizabeth was home again, returning from her shift. The serene home environment was replaced by threats from a stranger with a sword on the roof of a metropolis. The girl felt everything as if it were real, even the force of the blow. Unable to hold back, the main character flew down from the high roof. The girl woke up in a cold sweat and discovered that the owner of the palace had already left. The maids prepared the dress that the prince left for his guest before his departure. Elizabeth put on the outfit. She didn't like the bright jewelry and the appearance itself. It seemed that the clothes were too small and pressed on the body. The maid suggested breakfast and warned that afterwards there would be a meeting with the master's official fiancée. The chosen one was to be Stephanie, the youngest daughter from the noble family of the Duke. But the prince did not want any relationship with her, so he offered the role of his woman to the unfamiliar Elizabeth, relying on her courage and intelligence. The young duchess and her maid were waiting for her competitor. Unable to bear it any longer, Stephanie went through the palace halls in search of the impudent girl who had not answered her call. The rivals met in the middle of a spacious hall. Elizabeth's elegant dress amazed the bride. She had seen something like it before. Having decided not to spoil the relationship from the first minute, the main character, on the advice of the maid, greeted the noble person with a bow. Stephanie's maid reprimanded the girl and hit her in the face. Elizabeth did not expect the attack and did not have time to dodge. Her cut lip cracked and a drop of blood appeared. The main character was no longer willing to tolerate insults. While the rivals were getting to know each other and sorting things out, in the work residence, Armando was finding out the origin of the stranger's name. Unable to find the information, the prince ordered Ray to enter the girl's new details. At this time, the maid again intended to teach the disobedient commoner beauty a lesson. This time, Elizabeth intercepted the blow. Maid Stephanie didn't expect resistance. The bride's faithful assistant managed to wriggle out of it. The maid took out a tube and shot a magic arrow at her mistress's rival. At the last moment, the main character managed to dodge. The tip flew very close and easily entered the wall. The stone cracked under the influence of magic. Elizabeth was ready for a fight. She was not happy with being killed right in the palace. The bride's maid suddenly pulled out a blade and prepared to attack. The faithful servant didn't have time to take a step before she fell dead to the floor, bleeding from the impact of the magic arrows. At the entrance to the hall stood the second prince of the kingdom, who decided to save his brother's new chosen one from death. His Highness greeted Elizabeth, who was shocked by the girl's death. Jackson was the opposite of Armando. Only his deep blue eyes told him that they were close relatives. The prince introduced himself and offered to show his guest the palace. The young man showered Elizabeth with compliments, admiring her beauty. The main character didn't like the gentleman's sweet speeches. She politely said goodbye and left the room. Jackson watched Elizabeth walk away, assessing her courage and intelligence. The head maid shared some information about the history of the royal family. There were 3 heirs to the throne, but the eldest was a daughter, so she did not claim the title. Her name was Patricia. The second was that same Prince Jackson, who easily took the life of a servant. The third child, and second in line for the crown, was Armando. The main character realized how dangerous it was for her to be in the palace in the status of her younger brother's chosen one, and she was determined to talk decisively with the master. Ray reported to his master about Elizabeth's arrival. The prince was busy, but the girl did not wait and burst into the office. The main character briefly described the whole situation that had developed between the heirs and asked to give her a weapon. The assistant was shocked by the guest's intelligence, who had gotten her bearings in the course of the day and drawn conclusions. Armando didn't need the young duchess. She only made his path to power more difficult. In order to get rid of his official bride, the prince offered Elizabeth the role of his woman, using the latter as a puppet, creating a threat to her life. The conversation continued. The girl easily dodged Armando's arrow and continued her speech. The prince simply wanted to see how agile his guest was. Satisfied with the results of the check, the gentleman agreed to the girl's demands. At parting, Armando asked Elizabeth not to wear the dress she was wearing anymore, which surprised her because, according to the maids, it was his choice. Ray received the master's instructions and led the guest to the weapons room. There was a training field in the courtyard of the castle. The prince's best guards spent their days here perfecting their fighting techniques. The soldiers were surprised to see the owner's assistant with a girl in the yard. No female had ever visited these places before, and the boys could not understand why the girl was heading to the weapons storage room. Squad leader Marcel was dissatisfied with how quickly his team was distracted by the stranger and ordered the training to continue. The armory truly had a royal selection. The policewoman's attention was drawn to a small, sharp blade, similar to one she confidently used for various official purposes. Ray moved from short blades to swords. The girl's gaze stopped on a beautiful wooden box. The main character asked the escort to open the box. What she saw immediately struck the soul of the weapons lover. It was a pair of special swords made of an unknown alloy, very light and durable. The girl took the blade out of its sheath. It was all glowing. Ray explained to the guest that it was a gift from a neighboring kingdom. The prince did not use it. The blade's special feature was a constant supply of magical mana. Elizabeth made a choice. It was necessary to find a source of energy that had to be constantly nearby. The girl decided to choose a guard as an addition to the weapon, who would provide her support The squad was built on the training ground. None of the fighters agreed to Elizabeth's proposal. The squad leader explained the position of his colleagues to the police. All the guards had been invited by the prince himself to ensure his safety. They were the best of the best. The main character realized that Ray was cunning when he agreed to build a combat group. He knew the result in advance. Elizabeth, without thinking, snatched the sword from her escort's sheath. The girl pointed the sharp blade straight at Marcel. Elizabeth suggested a duel without the use of magic. The dress was not suitable for fighting, so the beauty borrowed clothes from Ray for a while. She looked stunning. The commander, on behalf of the entire group, accepted the stranger's challenge. The fighters watched the strange battle with interest. They had never seen girls with a sword. Despite her desire to win, Elizabeth's new youthful body was weak, and she had difficulty fighting off the attacks. Marcel managed to avoid the policewoman's blows. The sword was not as strong as it should have been, and cracked. Elizabeth did not lose her head, and suggested continuing the duel with her fists, in which she was much more experienced than in using bladed weapons. The commander laid down his sword and prepared for further battle. The main character continuously attacked the enemy. Marcel had never seen such a fight before and did not have time to fight back. He lost his balance after receiving a powerful kick from his opponent. A couple of subsequent attacks from the fragile beauty finally finished off the formidable fighter. The decisive blow knocked the guard off his feet. The squad watched the fight with excitement, not understanding how the girl was able to defeat their leader. Marcel lost consciousness for a few seconds. Upon waking up, the warrior knelt before Elizabeth and apologized. The commander agreed to be her bodyguard, but the main character refused the help, realizing that he was thus refusing the squad and accompanying the prince. Despite everything, Marcel agreed to become the young lady's protector. The main character took the warrior's oath. It was time to return to the palace. Upon arrival, Ray reported to the gentleman about the results of his visit to the armory and the guests' fighting abilities. The prince thought about the unknown past of the fragile girl who freely defeated his best knight. Returning to the palace, the main character went to the bathroom under the astonished gaze of her maids. Steam rose over the small warm pool, and Elizabeth took off her uncomfortable shoes in anticipation of bliss. The girl didn't have time to take off her clothes before her feet slipped on the wet floor, and she flew straight into the water, frightening the prince who was resting there. The indignant beauty demanded that they free up her space and leave. The policewoman wanted to lie alone in the warm water, summing up the day. Armando explained that according to legend, they were a couple in love, and he could not leave the room in a hurry, inviting the girl to join him. Elizabeth refused, contenting herself with a wooden tub of water. They were unable to enjoy the water procedures. After getting dressed, the young people left the bathroom. As expected, the courageous prince carried his chosen one in his arms. The maids watched their master's romantic relationship with delight. Left alone, Elizabeth and the prince continued their conversation, and the young man told her that his beloved had recently been killed due to competition for the throne. Armando understood the mortal danger of having a guest in his castle. In a distant estate, the third prince's fiancée, Stephanie, was still saddened by the absurd death of her faithful maid. The new maid's name was Helen, and she tried to calm her mistress down. The duke's entire family gathered in the main hall of the estate for a council. The head of the family had heard about the appearance of his daughter's competitor in the palace and was making plans to eliminate her. Older brother John advised Stephanie to return to her chosen one and continue to charm him. Despite her status, the young duchess was well versed in the family business. The noble gentry owned mines with numerous slaves, but was not prepared to fight with competitors. The duke promised to deal with the stranger. For this purpose, he had already hired a killer. In her heart, Stephanie was even upset, sympathizing with her rival. In order to test her new weapon, the main character went to the security training base. The fighters spent entire days training, perfecting their techniques. The girl took out her magic swords, offering a duel. Remembering what happened to their commander, the warriors categorically refused to fight the guest. There was not a single security guard left on the stadium field. Everyone had run away, suddenly remembering their urgent business. Marcel was left to offer himself as an opponent. The bodyguard told a little about the magical abilities of some of the kingdom's inhabitants. The warrior revealed information that not everyone had the magical gift. It had to be activated from childhood. The main character asked to show how the energy charge works. The sword's striking power after being recharged became destructive. Elizabeth spent the whole day trying to master the control of the new weapon. The girl realized that warriors with such destructive energy did not need other methods, so she easily managed to cope in hand-to-hand combat with the leader of the squad in a battle without using magic. It got dark. It was time to return to the palace, but Marcel couldn't stand on his feet at all. Elizabeth realized that she had thoughtlessly spent all of the bodyguard's energy reserves with her training. The main character was helping the warrior to get up when suddenly lightning flashed. The guard managed to protect his charge by shielding her from the arrow with his hand. On the roof of the wall stood a stranger, upset by the unsuccessful attempt. The unknown warrior was wearing a mask and threatened to kill both of them. Marcel ordered Elizabeth to run away while he tried to apprehend the killer. The girl was in a warlike mood. She had found a powerful energy charge and was not going to leave the battlefield. To accomplish this task, the killer had to have a huge amount of mana, which was what was needed for the swords at the moment. At this time, the killer opened the flow of magic. The bodyguard activated the capture weapon and was ready to repel the attack. The couple deftly avoided the energy charges. The killer was upset. He was unable to quickly deal with the victims. The enemy turned out to be stronger. Marcel's strength was running out. He asked Elizabeth to leave him alone and run away. The arrow wound on his left hand also took away energy. The main character was not going to give up. She suggested a tactical move to her partner. The mercenary moved in for close combat and activated his fire sword. The squad leader had unique abilities, for which he was invited by the prince. He was able to repel the magic flow. The girl was nearby, the swords were loaded, and she hurried to help Marcel. The killer used magic again to stop the beauty. The policewoman's sword easily pierced the hand that was directing the deadly charge towards her. Now the guard and Elizabeth were attacking, and the killer was defending himself. One of the blows managed to send the mercenary into a deep knockout. The girl enjoyed the break with her bodyguard. Suddenly, Marcel staggered and fell. The energy ran out, and the young man lost consciousness. The killer woke up and took advantage of his opportunity. The main character's fiery sword was full of mana and reliably protected its owner. Now the mercenary was trying to escape from his potential victim. Elizabeth was not going to let the killer go and attacked him. The policewoman managed to catch up with the criminal. He was exhausted from the rapid depletion of his energy reserves. The girl really wanted to take off the mask that hid the mercenary's face. In front of her stood a guy who looked like a beautiful girl. The killer's name was Martin. He was very embarrassed about his face. Elizabeth offered the mercenary to die or become her second bodyguard. The young man needed help in finding his sister, who had been enslaved in the mines, so he was forced to agree in order to stay alive. It turned out to be even easier to deceive the customer, since he had never seen the killer's face, so Elizabeth got a new maid, Marta. The next 2 days, the girls spent time in the palace library. The main character tried to learn to read an unfamiliar local language, wondering how she could understand everything and speak it. Ray visited the guest and said that the bodyguard had just regained consciousness, but was still weak and could not get out of bed. Elizabeth went to visit the guard, sending Martha to make drinks. The girl was glad to see Marcel alive and well. The young man was surprised by the appearance of the lady. The main character knew that she could trust the warrior and told him that his weakness was her fault. She continued to use the energy boost from the young man even when he was unconscious. At this time, the head maid entered the library and gave the new maid a task. She had to dust the numerous books. Half an hour later, Martin couldn't move at all. He didn't understand how the girls could easily cope with their clothes and heels. The fake breasts made it difficult to breathe. The maids decided to meet a new colleague, and went into the library. The girls caught Martha trying to get rid of the inserts, accusing her of deliberately enlarging her breasts to attract the prince's attention. At the Duke's estate, they were waiting for news. The mercenary did not get in touch, so the head of the family realized that the assassination attempt on the prince's chosen one had failed. To her surprise, Stephanie was pleased with the message. It was time to return to the palace. The new servant Helen was ready to defend her mistress herself and destroy the impudent stranger. The Duke and his son agreed with the maid's plan. There was a guest at the second prince's residence. The young man often spent time with his new girlfriend, Baroness Roxy. In Jackson's eyes stood his younger brother's chosen one, with her charming stubborn look and independent gait. The beauty was upset that she could not devote much time to her prince, since her mother rarely let her go to the palace. Roxy happily told her chosen one that she was pregnant. Jackson's mood changed, and he ordered his servant to take the Baroness home. The girl was upset by the hasty separation, but the prince promised to visit her, having whispered a few words to his assistant before doing so. Elizabeth continued her conversation with the bodyguard. She trusted him completely. Marcel was surprised by the attitude of the prince's chosen one towards him, but remained faithful to his master. Several years ago, Armando freed a warrior from slavery, seeing great potential in him. Marta prepared a healing decoction and headed to Marcel's chambers for her mistress. Ray came across the maid and was surprised by the beauty of the new maid. The young man offered to help and see the girl off. Thanks to her assistant, Marta quickly found Marcel's room. The bodyguard reluctantly drank the bitter medicine. Elizabeth introduced her guard to the new maid, telling him where the assassin had disappeared to. The main character really wanted to go outside the palace. The assistant conveyed her desire to the prince and received permission with instructions to accompany the girl. Armando was surprised that his guest was going to visit the lands of her enemy, Count Baxter, who was a subordinate of the second prince. It was time to begin the search and release of Martin's younger sister. The conspirators gathered in the library and discussed the plan. Elizabeth and Marcel were supposed to distract the guards of the dungeon where the slaves spent the night after working in the mines. Martha and Ray, dressed in women's clothing, had to go down to the dungeon and find a sister with the same name as the eldest, among a large number of little slaves. The prince's servant tried to refuse to change clothes, but to no avail. So, another maid, Elizabeth, appeared. It was time to hit the road. At the reception of the young duchess, friends discussed the news about Roxy, who had an accident when her carriage overturned, and those around saw the fragile girl bleeding heavily. Stephanie had been friends with the modest, sweet Baroness since childhood, and was unhappy with the negative attitude of others towards her. The girl did not recover from the disaster and lay in her estate under the care of doctors. Having learned about the grief, the Duchess decided to visit an old friend. Roxy was very pale and upset. Stephanie tried to calm her friend down and find out what happened to her. The girls were left alone, and the young Baroness told them that she had lost Jackson's child. The Duchess tried to calm the inconsolable girl as best she could. Doctors told Roxy that she would no longer be able to have children. It was dark when the conspirators reached the outskirts of the city, where the dungeons were located. The policewoman repeated the plan of action once again. The newly minted girls had to go, without attracting attention, to an underground prison where slaves were kept at night. Having agreed to meet, the friends went their separate ways. On the way, Ray told Elizabeth where mana comes from, and that it was initially necessary to find a rare spiritual stone. The abilities of a magician could only be developed up to the age of 12, so not many people had these skills. A mandatory condition for the child was activation with the help of spiritual people, of whom there were even fewer. Without them, it was impossible to awaken abilities. Very rarely could adults independently master magical powers. Among these few was Marcel, whom the prince found to be his guard. The main character was shocked by the new information. It was time to act. Elizabeth and her bodyguard went to look for the guards. The guards were in place. They needed to be led away from the entrance to the dungeon. The way was clear. and Ray and his partner, dressed in women's work clothes, went down. Martin recalled his childhood years when his younger sister Martha played with him and braided his hair. Hundreds of young slave girls were behind bars. The young man ran around the dungeon and called for the girl. The smell of dirty bodies made it difficult to breathe. Marta asked the girls about her sister. While the search was fruitless, it was necessary to go further along the dark corridors. The guards' resistance was useless. They were guarding children exhausted by hard physical labor and therefore did not possess magic. There were only 8 guards, and the conspirators quickly isolated them. The main character heard crying and looked up. There was a cute baby sitting in a cage under the ceiling. There were tears in the huge eyes of the strange little creature with animal ears and a fluffy tail. Elizabeth had never seen such creatures. Marcel said that there are werewolves that are caught in the wild forests and sold to rich nobles as pets. Little Charlie was one of them. The girl was ready to free the cute little one and swung her sword. A strange little animal with a human body, claws and tail hoped for salvation. The cage broke, but the height was great. Elizabeth called the baby to jump, intending to catch him so that he wouldn't crash. Charlie jumped and landed right into the arms of his savior. Sweet bright eyes looked wide at the girl. The main character did not wait for gratitude. The cunning animal bit her on the shoulder. Marcel did not have time to warn the owner that werewolves can be dangerous. Taking advantage of the confusion, Charlie escaped. Elizabeth suddenly felt very weak. Her whole body did not obey her. Marcel picked up the girl in his arms so that she wouldn't fall. This was a temporary effect of the werewolves' saliva that quickly wore off, giving them the opportunity to escape. At this time, the search for Martha continued. The slaves did not know where the girl could have disappeared to, assuming that she had fallen ill and had been taken away to an unknown location. Martin was very upset by the unsuccessful attempt. It was necessary to find out where the sick children were sent. Charlie ran through the corridors of the dungeon. He was also looking for his little sister. Suddenly, the werewolf felt weak, and oddly enough, the girl's blood also affected him. The exhausted, shaggy fugitive was found by the guards. The guards did not understand how Charlie could escape and wanted to detain him. The werewolf gathered his strength and resisted, killing the first warrior. The second guard tried to use protection. Charlie was angry and used his magic. The half-beast dodged the guard's attack. The werewolf possessed great strength and easily dealt with the attacker. Having inspected all the dungeons, the newly minted maids gathered to meet their friends. Ray turned on the power core so Marcel could determine their location. Suddenly, stones began to fall from the ceiling. Having broken through the upper vault of the dungeon, something fell down with a crash. Charlie and the guard fell down, destroying the ceiling. Martin, as a maid, had heard of werewolves, but had never seen one before. However, Charlie was unable to escape. The magic chain bound his throat and entangled his body. Not far away, Count Smith himself appeared with his guards, turning on the magic lock for his pet. Baxter grabbed the half-beast by the skin, not understanding how he managed to escape from the cage. The guard, who miraculously escaped from the werewolf, was punished on the spot and beheaded by his master in front of his slaves. The gentleman knew all the characteristics of the pet and ordered to bring the ticks. Charlie began to cry and tried to resist, but the chain prevented him from breathing. The owner easily pulled out the fangs, promising to cut off the claws. Blood dripped from the tortured werewolf's mouth. Baxter reported that there was an epidemic among the slaves in the dungeon and ordered the guards to kill the girls. The unfortunate people ran in terror in all directions, trying to find salvation. The new maid Elizabeth wanted to stand up for the girls. Ray did not allow Martin to reveal himself so as not to harm his master. The guard's magical blow was already directed at the slaves. The fiery sword saved the victim. The main character appeared in time. Marcel and Elizabeth received the signal and went to their friends. The conspirators appeared just at the moment when the fate of the girls was practically decided, and heard the order of Count Smith, who was surprised by the unexpected appearance of the third prince's chosen one in the dungeon. The werewolf found out who the girl was, who saved him from the cage and whom he managed to bite. Baxter was ready to get even with Elizabeth for his past humiliations. The main character defended the slaves, convincing them that everyone's life is precious, regardless of their status. Smith did not believe that slaves could live freely. He considered himself a benefactor who provided them with food and work. The slave girls grumbled and agreed with their master. The policewoman understood the state of the frightened girls. The main character tried to prove to them that it is possible to live independently without fear of being killed with impunity. Baxter decided to deal not only with the slaves, but also with his offender, coming up with an excuse about the accidental death of the girl and the suppression of a workers' rebellion. Elizabeth allegedly died from an attack by slave girls, who were then punished by late-arriving guards, thus ridding the Count of all his problems at once. The girls finally realized that they would die in any case. The main character didn't think about giving up. Elizabeth prepared to attack the main culprit. Inspired by the support, the slaves took the stones and prepared for an unequal fight. The girls attacked the guards as a crowd. The prince's chosen one fought off the attacks of the Count's assistants with a sword. The fight was unequal, but the girls did not give up. The guard's magic could not cope with the power of Elizabeth's weapon. The fire sword was excellent at dealing with a crowd of warriors. Trying to protect the owner, the guards surrounded him from all sides. Elizabeth ordered her friends to stand up for the slaves. Marcel happily drew his sword, frightening the enemies who were not expecting strong support. Ray masterfully used his magical power, throwing his opponent aside. The Count realized that he was losing. Almost all of his guards were killed. Baxter chose the shield that would save him from death. Smith threatened to kill Charlie, using him as a hostage. Elizabeth stopped her assistants with a sign. As a police officer, she clearly knew the rules for working with a criminal. The girl meekly followed the Count's instructions and knelt down, asking for forgiveness for her actions. Smith was pleased and relaxed, preparing for the next demands. The assistants looked at their mistress in surprise and did not understand what was happening to the determined, daring girl. While the main character was distracting Baxter, one of the slaves attacked her enemy from behind, hitting him on the head with a stone. It was the policewoman's turn to act. Elizabeth swung her sword, cutting off the Count's hand, holding the werewolf's chain. Smith was defeated. He would never harm anyone again. The slaves were glad to be alive and celebrated their liberation. The main character's brain took her to a past life when she patrolled the city streets as an intern and encountered a killer. The man wanted to take revenge on his former master, who had ruined him, and kill his son. The policewoman tried to dissuade the criminal, convincing him to release the child. The man was insane. He had long been planning his revenge. Young Elizabeth was afraid to shoot, hoping until the very end for the intelligence of the captor. The killer cut the fragile boy's neck with a knife. The shot came too late, when the child was already seriously wounded. The hospital reported that the artery was large, and the blood loss was immediate. It was no longer possible to save the child. Despite her colleagues' attempts to calm the intern, Elizabeth blamed herself for the untimely decision that resulted in the boy's death. The child's father was put on trial. The mother committed suicide, unable to cope with the loss of her son, and the main character was forever left with a sense of guilt for her unsaved life. Charlie distracted the girl from her difficult memories. Elizabeth hugged little Charlie and told him that everyone's life matters, no matter who they are. In a country where there is no justice, the main character had to take the decision upon herself and kill the one who took the freedom and lives of many others. The werewolf did not understand the meaning of the strange girl's words and hugged her tightly in response. The little half-beast knew that after the death of his master, power over him passed to his mistress, and decided to behave modestly. While the guards were unconscious, the slaves tied them up and asked their savior what to do with them. The main character suggested that the former slaves decide for themselves what the future fate of the guards would be. The girls were ready to take revenge for their suffering and kill everyone. Marta decided to take advantage of the situation and find out where the sick children from the dungeon were taken. The former assassin recalled his childhood. His father was a count and his mother a commoner. Despite the difference in status, the boy grew up in a loving family, and he was able to acquire magical skills. Suddenly, the head of the family died, and the child and his mother were forced to leave the city and live in poverty. The woman often left for several days, leaving a little food for her son. In order to survive, Martin's mother tried to find a new man, but she only met cruel gentlemen, one of whom she was forced to marry. The woman became pregnant again, and the head of the family was only waiting for an heir. Unfortunately, a girl was born, and the angry husband killed his wife. The boy prevented his stepfather from taking the life of the baby. Martin killed the father and took the baby. The brother left the city with his infant sister in his arms. Shortly before her death, the mother left her son a box. It was as if she felt that she would not live long. The woman sold all her old jewelry and left gold coins in a small wooden box along with a note. Martin loved the baby very much and named her Martha in honor of her mother. The girl was very nimble and grew quickly. While the young man went out to earn money, the girl waited for him at home. For her 12th birthday, her brother gave the beauty a beautiful bow. Marta grew up as a very kind and sympathetic child. She wanted to help children left without parents and take care of them just like her brother. The brother promised to take care of her all her life, but one day, when he returned home, he did not find the girl at home and learned that she had been kidnapped by slave traders. Martin, in the guise of Elizabeth's maid, asked the guards where they took the 6 slaves. The guard said that behind the mines, there was a ravine where the dying were buried. The young man did not wait for the others and rushed to search for the burial place. One of the former slaves remembered a little girl. They met at the slave market. The little girl was very kind. Martha kept talking about her brother, who would come and protect everyone. The guards didn't like the girl's conversations, and they beat her with truncheons and then took her to the ditch. Martin ran faster than the wind, hope glimmering in his soul. Marcel and the main character hurried after her. A terrible picture appeared before my eyes. At the bottom of a small ravine, bones and skulls of the slave owner's victims lay everywhere. The young man walked around hopelessly, looking for the slightest sign, and suddenly he saw a familiar ribbon. There was no longer any doubt the girl was dead. Martin recalled his sister's words about kindness and love for children and cried bitterly. Elizabeth came closer and tried to support her friend. The main character hugged the young man. No words could help the grief of her loving brother. Martin vowed to help Elizabeth in every way possible to end slavery. The second bodyguard suggested that the girl ascend the throne and make a revolution. The slaves supported the maid's idea and were ready to follow their savior. The girls were confident that the main character would be able to find the right way out and change the life of the state. Late at night, a small detachment returned to the palace. The third prince waited for his assistant's report. Everyone was very tired and wanted to sleep. The maids especially liked the fluffy stranger with a tail. The maids had never seen werewolves before, which only the rich could buy. One of the maids wanted to pet Charlie, but he showed her his teeth, terribly frightening the girl. Elizabeth scolded the bully and forbade him from biting. Ray, without having time to change his clothes, immediately went to the owner. The main character went to take a bath. Elizabeth ordered Martha to wash the furry pet, who did not like water at all and desperately resisted. Armando listened in amazement to the story of his chosen one's courage and her decision to free the slaves. The young man recalled that just recently, his deceased lover dreamed of doing the same thing. The tired main character got to bed and read, waiting for the prince. Armando didn't keep us waiting. The gentleman was a little outraged by the girl's behavior and her decision to bring the former slaves to the palace, not knowing what to do with them. Elizabeth reacted calmly to the prince's inappropriate behavior and offered to take care of her charges herself. Armando could not understand what his chosen one had in mind and how she felt about him. In a distant estate, the Baroness received her guest. Stephanie stopped by again to visit her friend. Roxy had recovered a little and was already feeling better. She was very happy to meet. Work was in full swing in one of the palace's offices. Elizabeth drew a complex diagram and asked Martha to submit the drawing to the master for approval. The third prince was busy when his assistant brought a drawing, according to which the main character asked for permission for the artisans to make items for household needs. Armando did not understand what was depicted on the paper. He had never seen anything like it, but he gave his consent. The second prince was having fun with another girl when a trusted servant informed him of the death of his subordinate, Earl Smith, who allegedly burned in a large fire on his estate. Jackson realized that his younger brother was somehow involved in this. Baxter had a son, Warren, who unexpectedly became the heir to a large estate and other possessions of his father, and was very happy about what happened. The master ordered his assistant to find him and invite him to the palace. Hearing the groans, Elizabeth went into the room to the pet, who was saying something in his sleep. The girl tried to cover the baby. Charlie jumped up abruptly and accidentally scratched his owner with his sharp, long claws. Drops of blood flowed down the main character's hand. The werewolf dreamed of his master's cruel son, who often beat and tortured him. The former owner constantly pulled out Charlie's fangs with terrible iron pincers. Werewolves heal wounds quickly and grow new teeth. The fangs were a valuable medicinal raw material and were very expensive, which is what the pet's owner took advantage of, constantly causing him pain. The main character was upset and went to treat her wounds. Charlie was afraid that he would be punished and beaten again, so he pulled out the healing tooth himself and gave it to the lady. Elizabeth was surprised to learn that fangs could quickly heal any wound. The girl thanked her pet, explaining to him that he would not be harmed and that there was no need to sacrifice himself. During another visit to the Baroness, Stephanie met with Roxy's mother, who thanked her daughter's friend for her support. The girls drank tea and reminisced about their childhood years. The Duchess brought a gift for the Baroness. The box contained a processed stone of the purest breed. From early childhood, Stephanie was fascinated by minerals. Her mother showed her a map and told her about unknown countries and deposits. The friends were both interested in gemstones and their processing, and often shared their successes and knowledge with each other. In the palace, the main character visited a small house that was designated as a place of residence for former slaves. Elizabeth informed the girls that she would conduct various activities with them every day. The rested girls were happy to see their savior. One day, Warren Smith and his servant visited his father's patron. The young man thanked him for his support and promised to serve his master. In the study where the main character often spent time, there was a large map. The head maid told the mistress that some of the distant territories were undeveloped, so the prince left every 3 years to capture new lands where various monsters and beasts lived. Another expedition was planned for this year. Charlie distracted the girls from their conversation and asked them to drink tea with sweets with him. Warren, pleased with the conversation, returned from the prince's residence. Suddenly, the young gentleman saw his pet in the yard, about whom he was very sad, believing that he had died in a fire, having lost the income from selling fangs. The man approached a stranger with a request to sell his furry friend for an exorbitant price. Charlie watched his hostess in horror. The werewolf recognized his former owner. It was the same tormentor who had recently appeared in his nightmare. The main character calmed the shaking baby, ignoring the treatment. Warren reiterated his high price. The servant, seeing the disdainful attitude towards his master, began to insult the girl. Without warning, Elizabeth struck her attacker. The young count was shocked. His servant lay on the ground motionless. The stranger apologized for her actions and invited the uninvited guests to leave. Charlie hid behind his mistress's back. The werewolf did not understand why the girl did not agree to a higher price and did not sell him. He was ready to work off his stay with the kind mistress in any way, but Elizabeth calmed him down by refusing her services. Unlike the main character, Martha was not at all against getting rid of the naughty and disobedient baby. The second prince watched with interest from the balcony as Warren met his brother's chosen one. Jackson was delighted by the girl's behavior and thought about wanting to get her into his arms. An experiment was underway in Stephanie's work lab. The young Duchess managed to obtain a new crystal with the help of the spiritual stone. The happy girl didn't notice how her older brother John entered her office. The young man, like his father, was also dissatisfied with his sister's activities. He demanded that she stop the experiments and go to the groom's palace. Stephanie was very upset. She did not like social balls and dresses. Since childhood, mining sciences came easy to her. Jackson quickly went downstairs and caught up with Elizabeth, presenting her with flowers. Martha and Charlie watched what was happening with excitement. The werewolf felt the negativity coming from the second prince. The main character greeted the gentleman and asked permission to pass. Jackson was not used to being refused and grabbed the rebellious girl. In a whisper, he suggested that Elizabeth come to him, leaving the third prince. The main character was adamant and was able to free herself from the embrace. Then the heir to the throne decided to leave his mark on the girl's body, knowing that this would greatly anger his brother. The young lady's response was a resounding slap. A small bloody mark was painted on the girl's shoulder. Jackson wished her luck, because he knew that Armando would be jealous and stop trusting his new chosen one. The second prince said goodbye and headed to his quarters. The main character was very upset. The bite mark usually lasted for at least 3 days. The tea party was completely ruined. It was time to return to the palace. Upon arrival, Elizabeth found on the table parts made by craftsmen, according to her designs. The girl quickly assembled the metal thing. The policewoman pulled the trigger. There was a faint pop. An iron bullet flew out of the barrel. It was necessary to urgently solve the issue of making gunpowder. Martha began to look for the thing that had jumped out of the unknown object, doubting that it was needed for household chores. There were guests at the Duke's large, beautiful estate. Roxy decided to take a carriage ride for the first time since the accident and visit her friend. Stephanie was glad to meet again. The young Baroness was delighted with the beauty of the buildings. It was her first time visiting here. A friend noticed the sadness in the eyes of her fellow sharer. The girls sat down to drink tea with delicious cakes. Roxy found an excuse to send Stephanie's maid to the kitchen and began questioning the girl. Helen was unhappy. The Duke ordered to keep an eye on his daughter. The girls were left alone. Stephanie was very upset by her father's prohibition to do what she loved, but she did not want to disobey him and was going to the palace to see her fiancé. As Roxy headed home, she was saddened by the sight of her only friend, who was always cheerful and supported her in difficult times. As a farewell, the Duchess gave the Baroness a small gift. The young beauty recalled the first time she saw the delightful Duchess at a social party. Stephanie herself approached the modest girl to meet her. Roxy heard only smirks from all sides, so she was very surprised. The friends quickly found common interests. They were both interested in crystals and minerals. Even when Roxy lost her child, Stephanie was there. She said that life goes on when there is a dream, that it was necessary to continue doing what you love in order to forget past sorrows. The Baroness sadly left the magnificent castle, which had become a golden cage for her friend. The Duke watched the carriage drive away from the window. Father ordered Stephanie to stop communicating with Roxy and go to the palace. It was time to organize a wedding with the third prince. The girl was very upset. The head of the family treated his daughter badly since childhood. Only the mother protected her child. The girl loved to conduct various experiments. Little Stephanie remembered how her parents often argued over her father refusing to allow his daughter to study geology. The Duke owned a large number of deposits. Slaves developed the ore and mined valuable stones. The eldest son was supposed to take over the business by inheritance, but knowledge was absolutely not given to the young man. Quite young Stephanie, on the contrary, easily assimilated the material, and at the age of 6, could distinguish between rocks and recognize valuable stones. The girl did not like dancing or embroidery at all. At the age of 9, the beauty showed her father for the first time the precious stones she had cut with her own hands. John was amazed by what he saw, but the Duke ordered him to forget about the dream. Stephanie cried for a long time, but she loved her father and tolerated his attacks. For the sake of her family, the girl began to successfully master social activities. One day, the Duke brought his daughter to the palace and showed her the future groom. The third prince was not alone. He was walking with his beloved along the alleys of the garden. The father reassured Stephanie that all obstacles could be removed. Only a week later, the young duchess understood the meaning of the terrible words. Her rival was found dead. According to legend, she committed suicide. It was the first death that young Stephanie had encountered in her life, not counting the loss of her mother as a child. The girl realized that marriage is not a guarantee of a happy life and love. As a guard, the Duke sent a specially trained servant, Meg, to the palace with his daughter. Stephanie did not understand the purpose of her protection. On the very first evening of her stay at the prince's residence, the duchess was almost poisoned. Her faithful maid saved her mistress in time. The magic stone revealed that the drink had been laced with poison. The noble woman did not want any more deaths, so when she saw Elizabeth for the first time, she tried to save the prince's new chosen one. Stephanie decided to intimidate the stranger with her bitchy appearance and behavior, but to no avail. As a result of their acquaintance, Meg died. Roxy returned home. Her mother was waiting for her at the gate. The Baroness loved her child very much and took tender care of her. The mistress of the estate always supported her daughter, and after the miscarriage, she was especially concerned about her health. The third prince was aware of the incident with his elder brother and called Elizabeth to his office. The girl was calm and told about Jackson's provocation. The behavior of the chosen one indicated that she was innocent. Armando knew his brother's abilities and trusted Elizabeth. The main character finished her tea and asked the master to allow the artisans to continue making the necessary items. An excited Martha waited for her mistress at the exit, worried whether the prince would believe his chosen one. When Elizabeth left, Armando was plunged into the recent past when, out of inexperience, he accused his first lover of cheating on him. Then Jackson did the same, leaving a mark on the girl's skin. The prince never saw her alive again, bitterly worried about what happened. He was never able to apologize to her for the unfounded accusation. On the alley next to Armando's apartment, Elizabeth met her rival. Stephanie threatened the girl, ordering her to leave the palace. The main character did not enter into a quarrel, inquiring about the mental state of her opponent after the loss of her maid. The Duchess was surprised by the girl's insight. Before these words, no one had been interested in her experiences. The next morning, the freed girls began training. Sports were not easy, and Elizabeth was a tough mentor. The second prince was having fun with another beauty when his assistant entered. The servant reported that his subject's eldest son, John, had gone to the mountains to search for new ore deposits, and after the trip, he should fully inherit the title of head of the duchy. Suddenly, the heir to the throne began to strangle the girl. Before her death, the beauty confessed that she was a member of an ancient clan that had long dreamed of dealing with the second prince. At home, Roxy constantly remembered her friend's sad look. Having decided to support Stephanie, the Baroness went to the palace. In one of the halls, the guest met a strange company and asked where she could find the prince's bride. Elizabeth reported that she had recently seen her rival walking in the garden. Roxy went with her maid to look for her friend. After some time, the girls realized that they were lost. The Baroness heard voices and saw people behind the bushes. In the clearing, Stephanie was talking loudly to Jackson. Their servants were nearby. Seeing the uninvited guests, the second prince gave instructions to his assistant to remove the witnesses. The servant completed the task with ease. Stephanie was shocked by what was happening. Helen stopped her mistress from screaming in horror. Within moments, the young baroness and her maid were dead. The Duchess couldn't believe that her best friend was gone. Suddenly, Stephanie's mouth began to bleed from excitement. When she woke up, the girl did not remember how she ended up on her bed or how long she had been unconscious. The maid was glad that her mistress had come to her senses, sending a colleague to inform her relatives about it. The Duchess thought of her mother again as they looked at the map of countries together and dreamed of traveling. Then, one of my first meetings with kind and sweet Roxy flashed before my eyes when they shared their small successes in mineralogy and stone processing. And now my best friend is no more. Stephanie finally came to her senses when her older brother entered the room. John informed his sister that he was going on a long journey. In the mountains, he would search for new deposits, and upon returning from the journey, he would take the place of the head of the duchy. The young man said goodbye. Stephanie was left alone, tears streaming from her eyes. She didn't want to live anymore. The maid handed over the box that Roxy wanted to leave for her friend. It contained a beautiful crystal, crafted by her hands. The Duchess once again remembered her childhood dreams and plans for a happy future. The girl took the jewel in her hands. Stephanie walked to the window. The sun was shining brightly. The lady was determined again. The young Duchess was determined to marry the third prince. The girl wanted to take revenge on Jackson for everything. The main character dreamed of a happy childhood. From an early age, her mother taught the girl to draw. These were not ordinary drawings, but large diagrams that the young artist had to reproduce from memory. Gradually, Elizabeth memorized every detail and mechanism. Armando woke up the girl who was calling for her mother in her sleep. The young people started talking, realizing that only here they were safe, without fear of prying ears. The prince tried to find out what items his craftsmen made and how to use them in the household. Elizabeth had just received a crossbow and was about to test it at the shooting range. At the training stadium, the main character asked Martha to hit the target with magic. The result was excellent. The maid was well prepared for the fight. Elizabeth praised the maid. It was her turn to show the results. The girl pulled the bowstring and took aim. The crossbow and arrows were made very well. The neighboring target was hit right on target. The freed slaves were shocked by the result. They could not imagine that it was possible to defeat the enemy without magic. After training, Elizabeth studied books in the work library again. The main character needed gunpowder for her pistol. The maid informed the mistress that her rival had an excellent knowledge of minerals and the various compositions of rocks. It was necessary to get to know the Duchess better, and the girl carefully studied the history of the noble family. Stephanie had only one brother. Martha was curious about where Elizabeth came from, with her strange worldview and knowledge of many things, but absolutely no command of magic. The main character promised to tell her fantastic story. The maid swore to believe every word her mistress said. The Duchess was the youngest daughter of the head of a large family, constantly expanding its mines in search of valuable rocks and nuggets. The girl's older brother went on one of these trips, hoping to find a new deposit in the mountains, which his longtime assistant Kevin had told him about. The search was unsuccessful. A frustrated John sat in a dilapidated house and waited for the results of another day. For a week, his people had been walking through the mountains, exploring the rocks. The brother remembered Stephanie's words that she had long ago studied the area on a map. There could not be a deposit in this place. Since childhood, the young duke was amazed by his sister's abilities, who easily learned information about minerals and rocks. Her mother constantly asked her father for permission to involve the girl in the family business, but was refused. Despite his weak abilities, John was born a boy and was destined to become the head of the duchy and owner of the mines. Having learned about her rival's hobbies, Elizabeth invited her to tea. The main character was very friendly and suggested that the bride leave the third prince. The Duchess responded by advising the girl to leave the palace in order to stay alive. Stephanie was counting on winning and already felt like a princess. Elizabeth suggested that instead of getting married, her opponent take up her favorite business and become the head of the family clan, promising to help with this. Shocked by the unexpected advice, Stephanie said goodbye and left the reception room with her maid. The young Duchess always obeyed her father and never thought about changing power. The girl's idea intrigued her. The main character looked at the untouched sweets and took a mug of tea, discussing the past meeting with the faithful Martha. Despite the quick departure of the noblewoman, Elizabeth was pleased with the results. A seed of doubt had been planted in the clever head of her rival. Stephanie, like everyone else at that time, was afraid of poisoning, so she did not touch the delicious dishes. She left, remembering the tempting offer of the prince's chosen one. It was very cold on the distant mountain pass. The young duke waited for news from his squad and discussed the results of the search with his assistant. He was tired and wanted to return home. Kevin promised the owner that workers should come soon with good news, as he was sure that there were rich mineral deposits in this place. The young people were alone in the house when suddenly the assistant attacked his master. The young duke managed to dodge the sharp blade. Kevin was determined. He had been waiting for this moment for so many years and was not going to let his master go alive. John used magic to try to defend himself from the unexpected attack. The enemy easily repelled the weak resistance. Kevin told the shocked duke, who had known his assistant for several years, that he was his half-brother. John didn't want to believe his opponent's words. Kevin had been planning the murder for a long time. The trip to the mountains was his idea, to lure the master out of the estate and be alone with him. The Duke realized the seriousness of his enemy's intentions and tried to escape. The young man calmly watched the victim. He knew that the servants and guards were long gone. He deliberately sent them to a dangerous place. John remembered his childhood and his beloved father, whom he respected very much and was proud of. The old Duke repeatedly told his son that he was the only heir and hope of the family. The young gentleman had difficulty understanding mineralogy, but he did not want to let his parents down and stubbornly tried to do what he did not like. Kevin easily caught up with the master and took out the magic blade. One blow was enough to mortally wound the Duke. The young man was pleased with the results of his cunning plan. Gathering his last strength, John tried to escape from the enemy. The fiery sword pierced the master right through. Kevin stood over the body of his dying half-brother, rejoicing in his easy victory. It was necessary to remove the traces of the crime, and the killer cold-bloodedly dragged the bloody body into the yard. Burying the body among the stones proved to be no easy task. The morning in the palace began as usual. The main character spent several hours training every day. In addition to wrestling techniques, the girls did physical exercises. Martha hurried to her mistress to share the latest news. The maid reported that a tragedy had befallen the Duke's family. The eldest son had died in the mountains. The girls thought about it. Lately, they had not believed in coincidences or accidents at all. It turned out that the noble family was left without an heir, since all the other contenders among close relatives gradually died under uncertain circumstances. The funeral took place in the family cemetery. The body of John and the small detachment that accompanied him on the expedition were not found. It was believed that they all died under the rock fall. Stephanie was very worried about the death of her older brother. Despite their cool relationship, the girl loved him very much. The Duchess recalled their childhood years when they studied science together. The head of the duchy held on with all his might and was barely able to attend his son's farewell. Upon returning to the estate, Father asked Stephanie to gather all its inhabitants at the central entrance. The Duke's health deteriorated rapidly, and he could hardly walk. The girl was very worried about her father and was afraid of losing him. The Duke and his daughter went out onto the balcony and told everyone gathered that his son had died tragically in the mountains as a result of an accident. The next news shocked everyone. The head of the family announced that he had a second heir who, due to health reasons, lived far in the south after his birth and the death of his mother. It was a complete surprise. No one had heard of the boy before. The old Duke introduced his second son to those present. The young man's name was Kevin. No one recognized him as the same business assistant, since he had previously tried not to appear in the castle. The young Duchess was most surprised by her father's words. After the speech, the family members gathered in the home's meeting room. Stephanie tried to ask her father about the new relative. Everyone knew that the Duchess died during pregnancy, along with her son. They were both buried in the family crypt. The Duke confessed that the young man was the girl's half-brother. The noble woman was shocked by the confession of betrayal. Her father had always been considered a model of fidelity, never marrying again after the funeral of his wife. The head of the family was enraged by his daughter's indignation. The old duke revealed his plan, according to which, in order to preserve the line, Stephanie had to marry the third prince and give birth to 2 sons. Until this moment, the newly emerged heir remained the eldest in the estate, who, according to the agreement with his father, was subsequently supposed to cede the title to his nephews. Stephanie didn't understand how it was possible to deceive others if the people knew about the intrauterine death of the baby. The head of the family expressed his dissatisfaction with John, who had never managed to master the mining sciences and mineralogy necessary for the prosperity of the business. Not understanding how his own son could be so stupid, the Duchess analyzed the situation with the sudden appearance of her half-brother immediately after the death of the heir, coming to the disappointing conclusion that it was a pre-planned assassination attempt. The girl was upset by the unflattering assessment of her brother's abilities, who tried very hard to please his beloved father. The conversation in the narrow family circle was interrupted by the appearance of Kevin, who entered the room uninvited. Seeing only 2 cups of drink in the young man's hands, Stephanie was very afraid of poisoning and knocked over the tray. In anger, the father hit his disobedient daughter. Kevin was very polite and tried to calm the Duke down. The head of the family, in a rage, sent the girl to prison, as he had done many times in childhood, scolding her for various experiments and successful acquisition of knowledge about minerals and crystals. The young Duchess remembered the terrible dungeon. Even her mother could not protect her from punishment. The little girl was very afraid of the dark. As a child, Stephanie would use her magic to brighten up a room a little, then lie unconscious for hours, replenishing the energy she had spent. Tears of grief and despair flowed down the sweet face of the beauty. After the loss of her mother, no one could protect her anymore. The beautiful, intelligent, and kind Duchess was the brightest memory of childhood. The owner of the estate was an educated and literate woman. She herself wrote books on crystals and the processing of rock materials. Having married a nobleman, the Duchess had to give up her dream, which she passed on to her beloved daughter, and rejoiced at its outstanding results. After her mother's death, Stephanie often spent time in the family library, rereading her works. Sitting in complete darkness, the young noblewoman again recalled her childhood. Morning came. The inhabitants of the palace woke up and prepared for a new day. The main character and her maid asked the prince to accept her. She wanted to secretly enter the duke's castle. Armando was surprised by his chosen one's bold proposal. Elizabeth was going to sort out the situation with the unexpected appearance of a new heir on the spot. Having received permission to leave the palace, the girl assured the heir to the throne that he would never see his bride again. The third prince was delighted with the sudden denouement of relations with his chosen ones. He thought that he could profitably get rid of the Duchess at the hands of a jealous admirer, and then, as an apology, he would publicly execute Elizabeth. Armando ordered his assistant to follow the main character. Ray was disappointed and had to wear women's clothing again as a disguise. 3 days had passed since Stephanie had been sent to the dungeon as punishment for yet another act of disobedience, and she had to spend a few more days in darkness and solitude, waiting for her father's mercy. But suddenly the door opened, and her hated rival stood on the threshold. The Duchess was frightened and screamed loudly. Realizing that there was no help to be expected from anywhere, her maid was sent to a neighboring castle for a while. The main character instantly appeared next to her and shut the noblewoman's mouth so as not to attract the attention of the guards. Stephanie understood that resistance was useless and mentally said goodbye to her short life. The main character, Elizabeth, dreamed of serving in the police since childhood. Instead of outfits, she drew weapon diagrams and studied combat techniques, but the universe prepared a life for her in the Middle Ages, among princes and werewolves. It all started after a gunshot took the life of a 24-year-old police officer. For some inexplicable reason, the soul was transferred into the body of a young, long-haired beauty of 16 years old. The cruel Middle Ages with dragons and magicians greeted the girl unfriendly. To escape slavery, the main character had to blackmail one of the heirs to the throne of the local state. The third prince, Armando, offered his patronage in exchange for the services of a fictitious chosen one. In order to save her life in an unfamiliar world, Elizabeth had to agree. The girl met her rival, a smart, beautiful duchess who preferred experiments with minerals to social balls, but could not disobey her despotic father. In order to be able to defend herself, the main character received a magic sword with a bodyguard, Marcel, to fuel the weapon with magic mana. Elizabeth recruited the hired killer Martin, sent by the Duke, into her maid Martha, promising to spare his life and help him find his younger sister, kidnapped by slave traders. The penetration into the dungeon with the slaves from the mines did not yield positive results. Martin learned that his baby had died. He vowed to take revenge and help the new mistress ascend the throne to end slavery forever. In the dungeon, the main character first saw a strange creature with an animal tail and ears. It was a baby werewolf named Charlie, who was bought at auction by a rich owner and kept in captivity, cruelly treating the pet. There were always intrigues in the palace. The struggle for the throne separated the destinies of two brothers, the cruel and cunning Prince Jackson. Like the chosen one of the younger Armando, he decided to take the brave beauty away from him by blackmail. While searching for Martin's sister to stay alive and free the slaves, old Earl Smith was killed, who found Elizabeth in the mountain forest and tried to make her a slave. His son Warren happily received the inheritance, having met the girl and his Charlie during a visit to the palace. The main character became a trainer for former slaves, daily training them in sports, martial arts, and shooting from a crossbow made by artisans according to her design. Jackson was constantly plotting against his younger brother. Marrying the Duchess was one of the points of the plan to seize power. Stephanie had to obey her father's patron. The noblewoman's only friend, the kind Baroness Roxy, unwittingly witnessed the second prince's conversation and was therefore killed before the eyes of the shocked Stephanie. The Duchess's elder brother was to take the place of the head of the family and the owner of the business. For this purpose, he went to the mountains to discover a new deposit of valuable rocks. The sister never saw John again. The young master was killed by his assistant, who turned out to be his half-brother from a poor family, dreaming of taking revenge on his father by destroying the entire family. The old duke was dissatisfied with his son's abilities and did not want to leave him the title, so he made a deal with the illegitimate Kevin, informing the residents of the estate about John's tragic death and introducing him to the new heir, whom no one knew about before. The health of the nobleman was undermined, and the young man demonstratively supported his father. The indignant young duchess was punished for her disobedience and, as in childhood, was sent to prison for several days. With the permission of her patron Armando, the main character went to the duchy to clarify the situation with the appearance of the unknown young gentleman. The third prince sent his assistant to keep an eye on Elizabeth. The girls, dressed as maids, made their way into the castle dungeon where the young noblewoman was being held. Stephanie was afraid that her rival would take advantage of the circumstances and eliminate her. The main character tried to claim the prince's bride. The Duchess did not believe the words of her fiancé's new chosen one at all. Elizabeth told of her plan to enter the new master's service as a servant. Stephanie looked into the girl's kind eyes, trusting her more and more. The main character asked the Duchess about the unexpected appearance of a stranger. The young lady said that in recent years, there had been a constant change of servants at the estate. Kevin had the same dream again. The young man recalled his childhood and his first meeting with his rich father, about whom he knew nothing until he was 6 years old. A noble gentleman stepped out of a large, beautiful carriage onto the street. The boy's mother threw herself at the feet of her former owner and begged for help. The poor woman, who used to work as a maid in the castle and gave birth to a child, was fired and was in poverty. Now she was crying and asking for money for medicine for her son. The Duke made Kevin's mother bark in front of a crowd of townspeople. The boy looked at the humiliation with horror and remembered this scene forever. The young man woke up in a cold sweat, and two maids immediately approached him. The new heir immediately noticed the unfamiliar faces, but did not show it. The maids said that they had arrived at the castle the day before. Kevin took Elizabeth's hand kindly, as if flirting. Marta pushed away the mistress in the maid's uniform, also hastening to introduce herself and offer her services. She did not like the master's behavior. The maid showed by her whole appearance that she was better than her colleague, and that she valued her master's attitude very much. The main character realized that Kevin was actually looking closely at her hands, hoping that he did not notice the difference between her youthful body and her calloused palms. Once the disguised maids were free, Elizabeth and Stephanie went to the family archives. The noblewoman noticed that 17 years ago, a gradual replacement of servants began. In the last 3 years, this happened much more often. The young lady tried to understand what caused the change in the composition of the workers in the years when she was just born. The volume of documents was enormous. Elizabeth collected lists of all the Duke's servants. The former rivals chatted pleasantly, trying to sort out their family history together. Stephanie looked in surprise at the main character, who she gradually began to like more and more. The prince's chosen one drew attention to the latest list of employees. The only servants left in the castle were the new ones who arrived in the last 3 years. All the previous ones were fired for various reasons. Having found a lot of interesting information, the girls returned to Stephanie's apartment for analysis. The old Duke's health was deteriorating every day. Kevin went to visit his sick father. The young man suggested taking a medicinal decoction to maintain strength. The head of the family reluctantly fulfilled the request of the new heir. When Stephanie entered the bedroom, the Duke was already asleep, with Kevin and his servants next to him. The noblewoman noticed the service staff for the first time. The half-brother was surrounded by servants from the last lineup. The young man assured his sister that he was taking care of his father's health, so she had no reason to worry. Stephanie was irritated. She did not want a stranger who suddenly appeared in their family to treat her like a close relative. During the entire conversation between the young people, the owner of the castle did not wake up. Realizing that she would not be able to talk to her father, the Duchess left his apartments. The servant informed the master that Stephanie, together with the new maids, had recently been studying the family archive and the lists of servants and had gone to the library again. Kevin ordered the assistant to tidy up the book depository. The main character became interested in an ancient book. The legend said that there was no magic on Earth before. All people lived peacefully until a warlike tribe appeared. The warriors wielded weapons and captured new territories through battle and bloodshed. The universe punished the murderers by sending a flood upon them. When all the bad ones died, the gods made the new people equal again. This was one of the great local religions. Suddenly, there was a knock on the library door. Then one of the servants entered. The young man saw only Elizabeth and said that the young gentleman wanted to see her. The main character followed the guy towards the exit, listening along the way to complaints about the difficult work and reproaches for visiting the archive without permission. Suddenly, the servant took out a blade and tried to attack the girl. The main character did not lose her composure. She was prepared for anything in the hostile castle. The powerful blow sent the young man flying back against the wall, and books fell from the shelves right onto his head. Elizabeth looked at the motionless servant and called the Duchess. Stephanie appeared from behind the bookcase, where she had managed to hide, at the direction of her new friend, having heard footsteps. The main character had a hard time persuading the noblewoman to stick together for their own safety. The prince's chosen one realized that her disguise had been exposed. Elizabeth tried to get information from the servant, who refused to answer any questions. The girl threatened to kill the uncooperative young man. Stephanie angrily demanded to know everything about the other workers and the young master. The allies took the prisoner to the basement. The servant confirmed that all the servants are Kevin's loyal assistants. 3 of them are magicians. The young man reported that the death of Stephanie's older brother was not accidental. All 200 people accompanying him on the expedition died in the mine. Stephanie was shocked by the tragic news. The Duchess realized that she and her father were now in danger. While the girls were interrogating the prisoner, Martha brought the body of another servant, who had been sent to the library to help, into the basement. The young noblewoman was scared. She had never learned a magic spell to attack an enemy before, although she had a high energy level by inheritance. The main character reassured her new friend and promised to protect her. Kevin was reading a book when his first assistant reported that 2 employees sent to get new maids were missing. The young master ordered Bob to find the girls. Elizabeth understood that the enemy would soon find the cellar, so she needed to act first. The main character advised the Duchess to hide, staying with Martha to delay the opponents. The comrades said goodbye and hugged each other tightly. Stephanie was very surprised by the help of her former rival. No one except her mother had ever supported her. Elizabeth went to meet the enemies, reminding the noblewoman that after the victory, she would have to help her understand the minerals and chemical experiments. Stephanie watched in amazement as the strange brave girl, who was also interested in scientific research, walked away. The main character took out the swords while Marcel was away. Marta was there as a bodyguard and a source of mana. The head of the family woke up. He felt that he did not have long to live. The only maid from the old set suggested calling a doctor. The Duke coughed, and a thin stream of blood flowed from his mouth. The nobleman realized that the poison was destroying his body. He knew who was trying to kill him and was happy with his choice. He himself gradually got rid of his relatives and business competitors in a similar way. The culprit of the old Duke's fatal illness sat thoughtfully in the huge hall, mentally talking to his mother, who had long since gone to heaven thanks to the owner of this castle. The young man could not forget the humiliation that his father had forced his former maid, Kevin's mother, to endure. A nobleman ordered his servants to take the poor woman away and leave her outside the city. The boy's condition was worsening. He urgently needed medicine, which was very expensive. The mother worked all day trying to save money, leaving her son alone. She loved her child very much. Kevin still remembered her tears and the warmth of her hands. In the courtyard of the castle, the main character encountered Bob, sent by the master to deal with the new maids. Elizabeth was ready for battle. Martha had enough mana to maintain the charge. The girl repelled the first attack. The attacker was higher level than the previous servants and possessed magic. The beauty managed to wound the enemy. The young man did not expect such resistance and activated energy protection. While under the magic dome, the opponent sent one fiery arrow after another. Martha saved her energy and could not attack the enemy. The main character realized that she needed to urgently neutralize Kevin's assistant while the swords were loaded, and went on the offensive. Elizabeth jumped up and from her height delivered the decisive blow. The power of the attack was so great that the ground shook when the opponent fell. The main character celebrated a small victory. Hearing a loud roar in the castle, the servants became agitated. It was a signal of defeat. Grace, Kevin's second assistant, came to tell him that the first mage had been captured. The young master sent a girl with information for the servants that the Duchess had been kidnapped, so it was necessary to find her and deliver her to the castle. The girls brought a new prisoner to the basement. Martha noticed that Elizabeth had badly torn her clothes. The opponent was tied up, but tried to resist and refused to answer questions. The main character was happy to decide which outfit would be more comfortable for battle. Having exchanged clothes with the prisoner, the girl felt comfortable, remembering her past life and her old habits. The young man was indignant and refused to betray his master. Kevin's first mate was not afraid of death. Elizabeth's sword suddenly entered between the captive's legs. Instantly taking the hint, Bob spoke. The fighter spoke about the details of John's death and the place where he was buried, saying that Kevin personally killed his half-brother. Stephanie was upset. She really wanted to take revenge on her enemy. Elizabeth couldn't understand Kevin's main goal. Bob turned out to be one of the half-brothers and said that in addition to the 200 servants, there were 2 more magicians, all of whom should have already gone in search of the Duchess and her assistants. The main character foresaw the situation and waited for reinforcements. A squad of former slaves, who had been training hard to master combat techniques, were supposed to come to the aid of the girls. They were supposed to dress up as maids and infiltrate the castle. Kevin's servants walked around the estate, looking for the noblewoman. One of the workers approached the fence when he heard footsteps. The young man managed to notice the maid before she knocked him out with one punch. Kevin's servants realized that the strangers were deliberately dressed in uniform. Taking advantage of the confusion, a squad of the main character's pupils surrounded one of the groups of servants. The crossbow arrows did not allow the enemy to escape. Ray, in a woman's outfit, had long since lost his allies and did not know if they were alive. Suddenly, Helen, the Duchess's maid, approached the prince's assistant. She recognized the maid, who appeared in the castle with Elizabeth. Ray ordered the girl not to give him away. One of the pursuit teams searched for Stephanie inside the castle. It was clear that the enemy would soon reach the basement and find the fugitives. Elizabeth sent the Duchess to meet the support squad, and she herself prepared for new battles. Stephanie was not yet ready for change. She could not imagine herself in the role of the head of the family. The main character suggested thinking, promising support in any decision. To give the noblewoman the opportunity to escape from her pursuers, Elizabeth and Martha went to distract the enemy. The plan was a success. All the servants rushed to catch up with the strangers. The girls led the enemies as far away from the basement as possible. The distance was sufficient. It was time to go on the offensive. Stephanie was left alone. She carefully peered around the corner, afraid of a collision with Kevin's allies. Not noticing anyone, the girl quickly ran towards the park. Suddenly, the young noblewoman was stopped by a group of maids. Before parting, the main character told her friend the password that she had to tell her saviors. The girls were cancelled with secret phrases. The calculation was correct. This was the squad of the prince's chosen one. The group leader passed a note to Stephanie. The letter contained new information about the Duchess's mother. The secret of the death of the head of the clan's wife was revealed. The reason was the birth of a daughter, after which the master decided to get rid of his wife. At this time, Elizabeth and her assistant fought off numerous servants. When the strength was already running out, a support group appeared. Kevin's allies couldn't believe that commoners could fight. However, after a few minutes, the girls proved that it was possible to win without the help of magic, and that the hard training was not in vain. The main character also received a note with interesting information. The message spoke about the cause of death of the former owner of the castle. 20 years ago, after the wedding, the Duchess arrived at the estate with her faithful servants. After the birth of her second child, her entire entourage was fired for various reasons. The old gentleman gradually grew weaker, but still refused to be examined by a doctor. The Duke was glad that he was leaving his affairs in strong, decisive hands, and his illegitimate son was very similar to him. Kevin followed his father's methods to the letter, getting rid of unnecessary people. The group, along with Stephanie, did not have time to leave the castle. One of the numerous squads of servants discovered the fugitives. The girls refused to give up the Duchess and prepared for battle. While the former slaves were covering the escape route, one of them tried to take the mistress to a secluded place. The opponents stood face to face, ready to attack. The second part of the squad, together with their trainer, carefully moved through the halls and corridors of the castle, fearing an ambush. Martha's energy was significantly depleted. Elizabeth's maid felt that she would soon be unable to walk. Suddenly, the face of an unfamiliar maid appeared in the window, her intense gaze seeming to hypnotize the main character. At the last second, Marta realized that this was the action of magical power. She managed to react and cover her mistress with herself. Kevin's second assistant found the fugitives and was ready to avenge her team. Grace caught the tired girls by surprise. Martha had long dreamed of changing her female attire, as Elizabeth had done, but fate again sent her a girl as a rival. The opponents stood opposite each other, assessing their strength. Kevin's assistant was the first to attack, activating the energy core. While the two sides fought, Stephanie and her savior ran across the castle courtyard in search of a safe place. Unexpectedly, the fugitives came across another group of Kevins. The guard tried to protect the lady, but the forces were unequal. Stephanie was shocked by another death. One of the attackers grabbed the young lady. The young man threatened the Duchess into going to his master. Taking courage, Stephanie bit the servant's hand and broke free from his grip. The girl started running as fast as she could. Near one of the doors, Stephanie saw the old maid Anna, the only one left in the castle from the first servants, who showed her the way to where to hide. The lady was very frightened by the unexpected meeting. She completely stopped trusting those around her. The girl remembered how the maid had taken care of her as a child. They often walked and played together. Stephanie couldn't believe the betrayal because her mother always trusted Anna. The maid asked me to believe and follow her. On the way, the woman said that Kevin had been planning to break into the house for more than 5 years. The young lady was upset. She did not know what to do and who to trust. 21 years ago, the parents met each other for the first time. The noble girl was very beautiful and talented, and the young people quickly got married. A son was born into the family, and 3 years later, a daughter. Everyone was healthy and happy. The children grew up quickly. This was the picture for those around. But in reality, everything was completely different, and the marriage contract, drawn up by the father of the future Duchess, was to blame for everything. Suddenly, rocks started flying, and Stephanie was scared when part of the column collapsed and fell on them. Anna managed to push the young lady away at the last moment and ended up under a heavy stone pillar instead of her. The noble woman was in shock. She could do nothing to help the dying maid. With the last of her strength, the old maid tried to calm her sobbing pupil. The woman said that the girl's mother always loved her daughter very much and asked Anna to take care of her after her death. Stephanie couldn't calm down. Tears were streaming down her face. Kevin was a little boy again, dying of a fever. One day, a servant came up to a poor woman and handed her a purse with silver coins, which were enough for an expensive medicine. The boy quickly recovered and often walked around the city in search of the kind stranger. While Stephanie said goodbye to her faithful maid, the duel between Grace and Elizabeth continued. Kevin's assistant easily threw huge boulders, and the main character barely had time to dodge them. The girl fought off stone projectiles flying from all sides. To avoid dying under the rubble, it was time to go on the offensive. Marta felt a decline in strength. There was not enough mana. The magic of the swords was gradually weakening. Elizabeth tried to figure out her opponent's weaknesses in order to launch an attack. Grace was one of Kevin's most powerful assistants, and also a magic user. An inconsolable Stephanie sat over Anna's body when she heard footsteps behind her. The third assistant to the heir to the title came closer and kindly invited the lady to follow him to the master. The young noblewoman was very tired of the large number of senseless deaths of her loved ones, and for the first time she did not run away. She was ready to resist. The girl didn't know a single attack technique and turned on magical protection. The young man smiled at the beauty's senseless attempt to hide behind the shield. The magician activated his energy field, his potential significantly exceeding the level of his opponent. Easily breaking through the wall, Kevin's assistant grabbed the Duchess by the throat. Deprived of the ability to breathe, the girl weakly tried to defend herself. Help arrived in time in the form of a disguised Ray. The third prince's personal assistant entered the fray. The noblewoman's maid was glad to see her mistress alive and tried to take her to a secluded place. Ray was not only the representative of the heir to the throne, but also a guard of the royal army, so he had no doubt about victory. To Helen's surprise, the Duchess was no longer going to run and hide. She had decided to fight back. Stephanie's protector drew his fearsome sword and prepared to attack. The opponents prepared for the fight, accumulating mana for an attack. The noblewoman refused to go with the maid and headed to the castle. She was tired of losses and thirsted for revenge. A plan quickly matured in the beauty's head. The girl entered her apartment, did her hair for the first time in several years. Her father had previously forbidden her to do it, and put on modest makeup. In this form she looked very much like her late mother. The Duchess kept a small sharp blade in her hiding place. Now Stephanie was ready for change. She was confident in herself and knew that she could take power into her own hands. The main symbol of the family was considered to be the family cane. The old duke almost never let it out of his hands. Only the true heir of the family could own the family heirloom. The rarity had a special secret that was passed down from generation to generation. Kevin found the old duke sitting in his favorite chair in the main hall of the castle. The head of the family inquired about the reason that had forced the young man to visit him. The young heir greeted his father with a bow. The men began to talk. The duke was pleased with the choice and gave instructions to his chosen one, considering his plan successful. The young man did not like the arrogant tone of his interlocutor. He tried to argue. He had his own tasks in this game for life. Kevin had no intention of fulfilling the agreement and giving way to his future nephews. He dreamed of destroying the entire family he had hated since childhood. But now, according to the agreement, he could not immediately kill his half-sister. The head of the family remembered his youth. When he first met his future wife, the bride's father prepared a marriage contract, hoping to provide his daughter with a long, happy life. The document contained a clause according to which the young man could not remarry, and the family was to have 2 sons. Several years later, this played a fatal role in the fate of the beauty. At that time, the young duke was in love and agreed to all conditions. The young man promised to fulfill the agreement, the terms of which were beneficial to both families. Kevin watched his father as he lost himself in memories. Everything was fine in the young family. A son was born, but everything changed with the birth of a daughter. And it was then that the husband began to think about killing his wife, which would cancel the terms of the contract. The young man was amazed by the composure of his father, who easily disposed of other people's lives. Kevin was ready to kill the terrible duke who deprived him of his childhood. Revenge for the death of his poor mother and her humiliation was close, but the heir held back. The young man stabbed his hated relative in the thigh with all his might, hoping that he would die a long and painful death. Kevin was glad that part of his own plan had come true. He was able to take revenge on his father. The duke understood that he had to die, but he was not upset. He was glad of the choice of an heir who was very similar to him in his cruelty and treachery. The marriage contract could only be annulled due to the death of one of the parties. The maid interrupted the conversation between the 2 gentlemen, informing them that the young lady was waiting outside the door in the next room. Kevin quickly said goodbye and went out to meet his stepsister. The bleeding duke called out to his son. The head of the clan reminded that according to the terms of their agreement, Kevin cannot kill Stephanie, otherwise he himself will die at the hands of the second prince. According to the agreement, the Duchess was to marry Armando and become a member of the royal family. The girls who came to help their coach could not cope with Kevin's assistant, who was a master of mana, and the crossbow arrows were powerless. Grace sent blast after blast towards her opponents, giving them no chance to dodge. With the help of a magic sword, the main character managed to hold back the attacks. Kevin's comrade managed to grab the blade with her hand, which suddenly cracked. Marta watched the fight from the sidelines, her energy drastically decreasing. The main character's rival figured out where the mana supply was coming from and easily damaged the maid Elizabeth's arm by simply touching it. The maid felt a sharp pain and almost lost consciousness. The main character didn't have time to protect her partner. Elizabeth realized that direct contact was dangerous, as everything her opponent touched would break or die. So she tried to act from a distance. The prince's chosen one gave the damaged weapon to her assistant, leaving the second blade for the fight. The forces were running out, but it was necessary to continue the battle. Grace watched the results of her magic with satisfaction. The fight continued, and without Martha's active support, Elizabeth found it more difficult to fight. The main character deftly dodged the charges, trying to exhaust her opponent. Since the sword's power had diminished, it was necessary to change tactics. Maneuvering between energy attacks, the girl got closer to the villain. The distance between the rivals was very small. Elizabeth dodged the attack and did a somersault. After a dizzying flight, the main character delivered a powerful kick to Grace's face. Kevin's assistant didn't have time to defend herself from her opponent's devastating attack. The main character had no intention of giving the enemy time to recover. The next blow knocked the heir's ally off her feet. A series of subsequent attacks finally left Grace unable to resist. Kevin's assistant did not give up. She warned those present that the very next morning her master would become the head of the family. Elizabeth's next blow proved decisive. The girl realized that she was weaker than her opponent. The main character offered help and advised her to go over to the Duchess's side. Grace said that before her mother died, she revealed a secret about her father, the Duke. A nobleman was expecting a boy and promised to fully provide for him, but a daughter was born. The little girl could not believe the words of her loved one. Left alone, the poor thing was forced to wander and earn her bread. Since childhood, Grace knew how to do everything and easily did men's work. She wanted to achieve respect and honor herself. But when the girl fell ill, she met her father on the street and threw herself at his feet, asking for help. The Duke had no intention of helping the beggar and ordered the child to be removed from the city. The girl resisted and threatened to kill her father, but the servant's fists quickly calmed her down. Grace woke up a few days later in a clean bed in an unfamiliar place, with several teenagers watching her with interest. The older boy's name was Kevin, and it cost him dearly to save his half-sister. The new acquaintance told her the story of her mother. The girl really was the daughter of a duke. His fate, and that of two others present, was completely similar to hers. He offered to become an ally in order to take revenge on the cruel father together. Grace had no choice. This team saved her. They helped and fed her, so she agreed, receiving a spiritual stone as a gift. The girl was the only one of the Duke's illegitimate children who was under 12 years old, so she had a chance to gain magical abilities. 3 years later, having become a girl, Grace realized how bad it is to be born a woman. When monthly bleeding deprives one of strength and the ability to fight, the body quickly gets tired and constantly requires rest. Kevin taught his sister the culinary arts and helped her break into the castle. And now, the strange stranger assured that even Stephanie could become the first head of the family, despite the fact that she was not a man. The information just didn't fit into the teenager's head. The main character explained to the girl that there is no need to be afraid of her body, that many problems can be easily dealt with, and that you don't have to curse yourself for being a woman. Elizabeth talked about the most basic hygiene items that were unknown in this world. The prince's chosen one offered Grace to become an ally. Her dreams included launching the production of the necessary means. The poor girl heard for the first time words about gender equality and the advantages of her body. Stephanie wanted to visit her father, but Kevin did not let her enter the hall, suggesting that they discuss the situation in the neighboring apartment. The half-brother insisted on marrying the third prince. The Duchess was not going to listen and submit to the wishes of the killer of her older brother. The young lady did not understand why her interlocutor needed the death of the old duke, who himself offered to inherit the title. Kevin thought about it. It wasn't really status that he wanted. The young man told his sister his life story. A little boy was dying of fever. His mother tried day and night to earn money to buy medicine, but there was very little money. Then the poor woman turned to the Duke, who was driving through the city in a luxurious carriage. Inside the cart sat a beautiful wife with 2 children, who were laughing and tenderly hugging their mother. Sick, Kevin looked at the happy faces and cried, realizing that he was about to die. The boy's mother begged the nobleman on her knees to save the child. Stephanie was surprised. She remembered this picture. After some time, An unknown maid gave money for the baby's treatment. The medicine worked quickly, and the child recovered. But the happiness did not last long. The Duke's servants found and killed Kevin's mother right before his eyes. The stepbrother told his sister that he was not the only person with a similar fate. His two assistants with magical abilities and his maid were also illegitimate children of a nobleman. So the main thing Kevin wanted to get was revenge. The main character and her new allies rushed to help the Duchess. The girls didn't know what Kevin had planned for Stephanie, so they were worried about her safety. Elizabeth wanted to find her friend as quickly as possible. One of the maids reported that she saw the lady not far from the Duke's apartments. The main character gathered a group of assistants capable of fighting and went to the castle. It was time to deal with the problem in the person of Kevin. Stephanie sympathized with her opponent's grief, but did not understand what right he had to decide her fate. The young heir was amazed by the changes that occurred in the girl after meeting Elizabeth. She was a completely different duchess, bold and decisive. The lady tried to leave, but Kevin ordered the servants to grab and lock her up. Unexpectedly, the noblewoman saw Helen among the heir's assistants. Maid Stephanie came to her mistress's defense. The maid, with the help of her mistress's mana and a magic blade, quickly dealt with the enemies. Within a few seconds, the way was clear. Kevin was surprised by the maid's actions, reminding her that she was subordinate to the second prince and him. Helen countered by saying that she was simply ensuring the mistress's safety, as agreed upon in her terms of employment. The heir had a higher level of magic and spiritual powers. He knew that his rival would not be able to cope with him. The maid managed to protect her mistress from the first blow with her body. The Duchess was unable to hold on and fell, but was not hurt. Helen was seriously injured and could barely stand on her feet. She begged her mistress to run. Kevin calmed his half-sister down. According to the contract with the patron, he couldn't kill the girl, otherwise he would have died himself. However, the young man promised the disobedient lady that after torture she would commit suicide, which did not interfere with the agreement. The heir to the title reasoned that when all the closest and most beloved people are lost, it is easy to go crazy, reminding his rival of all the recent losses. Stephanie remembered her loving, gentle mother, then her shy friend, Roxy. The ban on pursuing her favorite hobbies was also stressful for the girl. Kevin vowed to continue the killing, with the faithful Helen to be next. The Duchess ordered her half-brother to release the maid immediately. The young man had no intention of listening to his sister, and broke the poor maid's bones. Stephanie no longer wanted to see the people close to her die, so she activated her mana. The mistress had never been trained in attack spells, but she was determined to resist, remembering the principle of the crossbow and the former slaves who were able to resist the enemy without magic. Kevin was impressed by the concentration of her spiritual power. The young man managed to dodge the stream of fire, receiving only minor damage. The slight confusion was enough for Stephanie to grab Helen and hide behind the magical protection together. The heir tried to break the shield, but it turned out to be unexpectedly stronger. The Duchess concentrated entirely on resisting the enemy forces. The maid held on with all her might. She was grateful to her mistress for her care, and said that in fact she was not helping the princes, but Elizabeth, who was capable of changing the world for the better. According to Helen, the main character was not Armando's partner, so it was necessary to trust her and choose her as a reliable ally. While the girls supported each other, Kevin managed to break through the defense. Stephanie was angry. She was already ready for the new status of the head of the family and the protection of her life and her loved ones. Kevin didn't have time to take advantage. Elizabeth came to her friend's aid. The main character apologized for the delay. Elizabeth suggested that her friend meet again for a cup of tea and discuss the Duchess's new decision regarding her status. The girl sent Stephanie to carry out her previously conceived plan, which was thwarted by her stepbrother. It was time to deal with the main enemy of the duchy. Kevin greeted the main character warmly. He didn't expect to see her again. Elizabeth was not alone. Her assistant stood nearby. The young man admitted that he underestimated the girl at their first meeting, and it was his mistake. Among the enemies was Grace, which greatly surprised the heir to the title. The half-sister thanked him for saving her and offered to become an ally of the Duchess, who was innocent and also suffered from her father's despotism. Elizabeth supported the girl, protecting her from the attacks of her angry brother. While the opponents were exchanging phrases, Stephanie entered the Duke's office. Her father greeted her unfriendly. The daughter apologized for her late visit. The nobleman was dissatisfied with the girl's appearance. Her hairstyle reminded him very much of his wife. There was not a single portrait of the Duchess in the huge mansion. Her husband was simply afraid to see her face. The young Duchess responded boldly to her father's reproaches. She no longer feared his punishments. Stephanie had specially applied makeup and picked up her curls. She really did look a lot like her late mother. The Duke was exhausted from the verbal altercations. He wanted to know what his daughter needed. The young lady demanded that the cane, which was the symbol of the family, be handed over to her. The father categorically refused to listen to the madwoman, not understanding how a woman could be the head of the family. The Duke did not understand what his daughter was unhappy about and why she did not like the choice of her fiancé. Stephanie recalled the fate of her own mother, who was killed by her husband. She did not want to repeat this path and dreamed of being independent to pursue her own interests. A nobleman tried to explain to the girl that in the struggle for power, the strongest win. Even her older brother was not ready for this. He was weak and stupid, so he had to find a worthy heir. The Duke had many illegitimate children. Most died, unable to cope with the harsh conditions and diseases. Only a few were able to survive and get the opportunity to become the head of the family. Elizabeth couldn't understand why the servants killed Kevin's mother. The Duke's answer was simple. In his opinion, only hatred and revenge make a person strong. It was these feelings that were the main ones. It was they that were able to bring the illegitimate son to the castle. In fact, Kevin signed an agreement with the Duke, according to which he would only be an observer when Stephanie became the legal wife of the heir to the throne, without revealing his insidious plans to his father. The Duchess was to become a member of the royal family after the wedding. According to the old nobleman's plan, the prince's future son was to receive the legal title of heir. Stephanie looked at the head of the family with regret, not understanding why he lived when he had so many deaths of innocent people and children on his account. The Duke was amazed at his daughter's audacity. He had no intention of passing on the family heirloom to her. The girl concluded that the death of the owner of the cane would cancel all previous contracts. The Duchess did not want to ask her cruel father for anything. Stephanie was ready to get all her rights and status herself. The mortally wounded Duke could not believe that his daughter dared to take the decisive step. These were the last minutes of the nobleman's life. The Duchess said goodbye to her father. It was her revenge for her mother. The Duke was angry and reproached his daughter that she would regret what had happened, but it would be too late. Stephanie asked her father if he ever regretted killing his beautiful wife. The old nobleman thought, remembering his youth. The Duke did not know what to answer Stephanie. Perhaps for the first time in his life, his conscience began to torment him. One episode came to mind. It was the time when the young couple had just got married. The young Duchess was beautiful. She offered to make their family happy, despite the fact that this marriage was a mutually calculated one for their parents. The head of the clan was firm in his decision. He was not going to repent, so his daughter also did not regret what she had done. The Duke's strength was leaving him, and Stephanie's father fell unconscious. The main character carefully studied the enemy and developed a plan of attack. She needed energy support. Grace stood nearby. She did not regret that she had gone over to the enemy's side. She felt sorry for the young noblewoman who had nothing to do with her father's affairs. Kevin didn't wait. He attacked first, using a magical flow. The prince's chosen one prepared to meet the enemy flying towards her with her sword. But the target of the attack was not Elizabeth. The young man deftly bypassed the girl and seriously wounded his stepsister. Kevin had long noticed that the main character for unknown reasons, did not have mana. However, the opponent's swords required a constant energy charge. The heir recognized this weapon. The twin blades were a very valuable item that only a noble person could afford. Such a person was Patricia, the concubine of the emperor himself. These were her swords. The beauty was a master of weapons, and many years ago the master gave her a valuable gift. The third prince was Patricia's son, which is why the main character found a precious box in his armory. Kevin didn't understand how the blades got to his opponent, but he knew the peculiarity of the swords, so he neutralized Grace as a source of energy. Seeing Elizabeth's upset face, the young man realized that he was right. The girls' remaining assistants themselves needed support. Helen could not stand on her feet at all, and Martha was also very weak. Kevin's half-sister was in a semi-conscious state. There was no more time to think. The main character decided to resort to trickery and force Ray to take part in the battle, directing the main blow of the enemy at him. Elizabeth convinced Armando's disguised assistant to join the fight using her magic. Kevin heard the conversation and switched to a new source of mana. Ray had no intention of sharing his energy, but he had no choice but to fight off the formidable opponent. The tactical maneuver that Elizabeth had conceived worked. Kevin was incredibly strong and prepared to destroy anyone who helped the main character. The prince's chosen one convinced Ray to load his sword, as she was his only hope for help. The mana level of the assistant of one of the heirs to the throne was lower than Marcel's, but higher than Martin's, so the blade was quickly ready to attack. While the young man was taking the blows, the main character tried to find a way to deceive the smart opponent. Ray fought with all his might, realizing that the enemy was superior to him in level. Only a few people in the country had such potential, but this was an unknown fighter. Kevin was angry and tried to grab his opponent by the hair. The future duke was amazed when the scythes remained in his hands, and a young man in disguise appeared in front of him. The main character asked her partner to distract the enemy in order to try to get closer to him. Ray was sent to the castle to keep an eye on the main character. He wasn't going to fight anyone, but there was nowhere to retreat. Kevin's magic shield was a reliable backup against the attack. To distract attention, Elizabeth ordered the girls in the squad to start shooting. The assistants came closer. Crossbow arrows and metal bullets flew from all sides. The future duke fought off attacks from all sides. The young man had never encountered such a weapon. It was not very powerful, but it could cause significant damage to the body. Elizabeth achieved the desired result. She needed to distract her opponent from her actions. It was the main character's turn. Her sword had enormous destructive power. The force of the blow was so great that the floor and walls of the castle cracked in many places, and fragments of stones flew in all directions. Ray was unhappy because the girl used almost all of his energy to attack. Kevin sat on the floor, stunned by the force of the attack. It turned out that defeating the heir of the family was much more difficult than Stephanie's allies had assumed. Before the eyes of his astonished rivals, the heir to the duchy became even more powerful with the help of magical powers. Kevin's body floated in the air in a halo of new energy flows. The future nobleman was determined to quickly deal with his enemies and complete the process of obtaining the title. Ray stared in shock at the enemy who was aiming at him. Elizabeth didn't lose her composure, and at the last moment pushed her partner out of the line of fire. The heroine's actions saved the prince's assistant from death, but the girl herself lost a lot of strength, taking part of the blow on herself, and was unable to stay on her feet. Elizabeth was tired and confused. The fight was unequal, and there was nowhere to expect support. Kevin calmly sent blast after blast at his opponents. Ray tried to defend himself and activated the magic dome. The main character again asked her partner to distract the enemy. While the boys were exchanging attacks, the girl tried to go around her opponent to attack him from behind. Kevin noticed the girl's maneuvers. At this time, the prince's assistant tried to switch the fire to himself. The future duke was better positioned to deliver crushing blows from a height. Ray began to panic. He couldn't reach his opponent with his Zanpakuto. While her partner was parrying the blows, Elizabeth managed to reach the wall of the hall. The girl calculated every step to make a dizzying jump. The main character's plan almost succeeded, and she managed to raise the sword over Kevin's head. Elizabeth prepared to strike with all her might. The heir to the duchy noticed the danger at the last moment. The young man did not lose his composure and swung his blade. The girl's body fell with a crash at the feet of a shocked Ray. There was silence. Elizabeth's head lay separately, blood spreading to the sides. A moment before her death, the main character remembered the sound of the shot that took the life of a police officer. Then, in my fading consciousness, the fall from the roof of a skyscraper surfaced. The frightened girl sat on the hospital bed, her heart ready to jump out of her chest. Alex, a classmate, was in the room next to him. An old friend came to visit Elizabeth. The girl did not understand at all what was happening to her. The main character clearly remembered the last moment of her life. The young man tried to calm his friend, who had a severe headache. Moments from childhood flashed before my eyes. The mother loved her daughter very much. She tried to communicate with her as with an adult, always explaining various situations and the meaning of expressions and words. So the girl grew up as a responsible and literate child. Elizabeth told her friend a story about her penetration into the medieval era and magical creatures. In a distant parallel world, Martha could not believe that the lady was dead. A bodyguard, in a maid's uniform, leaned over Elizabeth's body, begging a higher power to bring her back. The former slaves were shocked. They realized that their savior was no longer there. Even Kevin was upset by the outcome of the battle. He liked the brave girl, who was able to resist without magic and easily control others. He even dreamed of making her his ally. The main character's head, with wide-open eyes, lay near the body. The calm did not last long. The heir of the family decided to quickly deal with the rest. Ray ordered the girls to run away, and he prepared to cover their retreat. Elizabeth's squad decided to stay and fight to the end. Without their mistress, no one needed them. Martin was wounded, but also refused to leave the battlefield, remaining faithful to his mistress. Elizabeth was Martha's only close friend after her younger sister's death. The prince's assistant could not cope with the enemy's power. Kevin went on the attack again. He knew that now he had no strong opponent. The mage dealt a crushing blow to Ray, incapacitating him. The young man was seriously wounded and could no longer resist. Next in line was Martha. The heir of the family has prepared the next portion of energy charges for the main character's assistant. The former killer became very attached to Elizabeth and was ready to follow her even to heaven. Kevin aimed an energy weapon, hoping to neutralize the enemy with one blow, who did not even try to resist. But the stream did not reach its target. Elizabeth's hand intercepted the beam, breaking it into pieces. Before Martha's shocked eyes, the headless body stood up and walked. The main character's hands reached out to the head lying separately. The prince's chosen one confidently returned the severed head to its place. As in the worst horrors, Elizabeth moved with her left eye flashing red. An exhausted Ray couldn't believe what was happening. The maid Stephanie watched the main character with fear. Martha was the most surprised and frightened of all, hoping that her requests were heard by heaven. Elizabeth walked up to her maid and hugged her tightly. The girl sank her teeth into the maid's throat and began to drink blood. Having had her fill, the resurrected Elizabeth let go of her assistant. The main character confidently headed towards Kevin. Ray supported Martha, watching in horror as what was happening. The partners could not believe that the lady was alive again. Elizabeth was getting closer and closer to the enemy, her left eye glowing bloody. Kevin was mesmerized by his rival's gaze. The heir of the family once again decided to take the initiative into his own hands and began the attack. The magic arrows flew away from the main character on their own. The girl came very close, easily coping with the hostile currents. Kevin didn't understand how Elizabeth could simply destroy his spiritual energy with her hands. The main character came very close to the enemy, leaving a magical trail in her path. With one finger, the girl destroyed the killer's defense. The resurrected woman's red eye stared at the enemy continuously. A powerful stream of energy sent by the main character destroyed everything in its path. The walls of the ancient castle also could not withstand the force of the impact and crumbled. Ray managed to turn on the magic shield to protect himself and Martha from the flying fragments. Kevin sat on the floor, bleeding and unable to move. The main character came very close to the young man. The girl easily lifted her opponent with one hand, holding him by the throat and intending to finish off the enemy once and for all. Elizabeth's left eye glowed a bright bloody color, terrifying those around her. The prince's assistant unexpectedly stood up for the heir to the duchy. Ray took out his Zanpakuto, ordering the monster in the form of a girl to stop. The main character saw a new threat to her life. Elizabeth directed a powerful stream towards her former partner, who had prevented her from killing the enemy. The young duchess was leaving her father's apartments when a loud crash was heard. Stephanie tried to run out of the hall, where the ceiling began to collapse. Huge stones were flying from all sides. Suddenly, the wall collapsed, a stream of energy throwing Ray and Kevin out of the next room, completely helpless. The Duchess could not understand what had happened during her absence, and what force could have carried out such a blow. Someone's shadow appeared in the resulting passage. In her usual world, Elizabeth sat in the ward. Her head continued to hurt. Alex tried to support his friend. The girl continued to talk about her strange adventures in another civilization and her feeling of loneliness. Elizabeth's best friend listened to her without interrupting her. Meanwhile, in the castle, Stephanie was surprised to recognize a new friend in her terrible enemy. Ray urged the Duchess not to approach the girl, who had become very dangerous. The noblewoman didn't want to listen to anyone and ran up to the main character, glad that she was safe. The allies' red eye made Stephanie tense up. The little Duchess loved to read since childhood and studied many books, among which were legends about terrible immortal monsters and vampires. These individuals were banned in the state and gradually disappeared thousands of years ago. Only more harmless werewolves and magicians remained. Stephanie's mother did not allow her daughter to share secret information with anyone and destroyed all ancient literature. Elizabeth had exactly the kind of eye described in the old monster books. Alex tried to calm his friend down. He convinced her that she was not alone at all, that she had many friends and acquaintances in the class and in the yard who knew her and loved her for her kindness, determination, and were always ready to help. The girl remembered how she convinced the former slaves to believe her and leave the slave mines. She really did have an easy time communicating in any way, and she could lead people. Elizabeth seemed to be in a dream. Tears were dripping from her eyes. The main character stood there dumbfounded after Stephanie's enthusiastic words. The Duchess recalled all the information she knew about vampires. They were unusually strong and dangerous enemies. Their distinctive feature was a bloody eye. The young noblewoman could not believe that monsters existed. There had been no information about them for a long time. They were even considered extinct. Stephanie thought, in one very old manuscript, there was a description of the healing of a man who, for unknown reasons, turned into a monster. The Duchess was not afraid and decided to try the ancient method. The girl gave her friend a drop of her blood. The young noblewoman tried to bring Elizabeth back to reality with a loud shout. Gradually, the main character's gaze began to change. The red light went out. Stephanie was very happy. The method worked. She thanked fate that she had managed to read the books in time as a child before they were destroyed, and knew what to do in such a situation. Elizabeth woke up. She could not remember what happened to her, and how she ended up in the castle among the ruined walls. The last moment the girl remembered was Kevin's sword over her head and a blow. The main character once again experienced the terrible episode of her death. Stephanie watched closely as her friend returned to her normal form. While the girls were talking to each other, Kevin tried to get up. Seeing his murdered father, the young man was very upset that he could not personally take revenge on him for all the insults and losses. The Duchess had her own motives for getting even with the head of the family. Elizabeth gradually returned to reality. Ray looked at the prince's chosen one with caution, fearing new attacks. Kevin decided to speed up the process of getting the title. The main character tried to negotiate with the heir, hoping for his prudence. The future Duke realized that the girl had returned to her previous state and was no longer dangerous to him. Elizabeth remembered that the young man turned out to be a very strong opponent and thought about a plan to protect her friends. Kevin prepared to attack, activating his energy cores again. The main character was ready to continue the battle until the victorious end. Suddenly, Stephanie shielded her friend with her body. This was her home, and she was going to protect it herself. The Duchess gathered her magic and struck first at her hated half-brother. The young man was surprised. He knew that his sister did not have offensive combat skills. Having repelled the attack, the young man tried to make a counterattack. Stephanie managed to turn on her defense and continued her attacks. Kevin was a higher level, so he was able to destroy the shield. The heir of the family prepared to finish off his rival with one blow. The Duchess realized that it was very uncomfortable to fight in a long dress with heels, and with a couple of movements, she changed her usual image, tearing off the hem and throwing the shoes to the side. Elizabeth was surprised at the transformation that had taken place in her quiet, hesitant friend. Martha reminded her mistress about the sword. The maid kept the weapon given to her by the main character. The girl thanked her faithful servant for her timely help. The former killer was ready to give all his mana to charge the blade. The friends stood shoulder to shoulder and prepared for battle. Kevin was a little confused. He was not prepared for such resistance. The main character did not hesitate and struck first. The young man managed to defend himself from the attack. It was the Duchess's turn to show her abilities. At this time, Elizabeth watched the enemy, ready to come to her partner's aid at any moment. While Kevin was distracted, the girl decided to take advantage of the moment. Having gathered all her energy, the main character calculated her power and struck the stone floor with her sword. The young man could not resist the sudden earthquake. Stephanie's energy flow was enough to deal a devastating blow. A wounded Kevin realized that together the girls were stronger than he expected. The Duchess was surprised that her half-brother remained alive after such attacks. The young man was completely enraged and determined to kill his rival immediately. The heir broke through the defense and wounded the girl. Stephanie lost a lot of energy and fell. Kevin blamed his sister for his troubles and suffering. The Duchess tried to justify herself because these were her father's actions, for which she was not responsible. The young man did not want to listen and prepared for the final blow. Stephanie couldn't help but cry, realizing that she couldn't protect her family and had to die. Kevin thought back to his first encounter with his father, who humiliated his mother in front of a crowd. At this time, in the Duke's carriage, the children watched in amazement as a poor woman knelt down, begging for help for her child. Then the Duchess explained to her son and daughter that there are many problems and inequalities in life, that people get sick, starve and die. Not everyone is lucky enough to be born and live in warmth and luxury. The young lady told Stephanie and John that aristocrats should help the common workers. The little Duke promised to do his duty. The exhausted young noblewoman knelt before Kevin, telling him what had happened in the carriage. Stephanie revealed a long-standing secret. John had sent the maid to the dying boy's mother with all his savings so that she could buy medicine. The main character took advantage of the situation and pierced the enemy's body with a sword. Kevin was shocked by the information he received and did not expect the blow. It turned out that he killed his savior. The Duke's illegitimate son was mortally wounded and was unable to take revenge on his father and destroy the hated family. Elizabeth couldn't believe that this hard battle ended in victory for them. Dying, the failed heir fell right into the arms of his half-sister. Stephanie hugged the young man. She felt very sorry for him, because it was their father who made the boy cruel and merciless. In the last seconds of his life, Kevin felt happy. Scenes from childhood, after his mother's death, floated through his head when the teenager conceived a plan for revenge and gathered his step-relatives. The beautiful Grace was always happy about his appearance. The future heir tried to appear serious, although he himself was very much lacking warmth and kindness. The younger sister was always trying to cheer up her strict brother. Now Kevin felt like a child again, coming to see his only close relatives. His mother came to take him to heaven, and the boy said goodbye to his brothers and sisters. Little Grace was the one who was most upset by the separation. The brother reassured the girl, promising that everything would be fine. Before he died, Kevin managed to whisper a few words to Stephanie. The Duchess could not hold back her bitter tears. The young noblewoman said goodbye to her brother, promising to fulfill his last request. The girls looked at the destruction after the battle. They were very upset by the plight of their enemy. The Duchess suggested to her friend that they return to their old conversation over a cup of tea. The main character understood that there was no way back. Her ally was ready for change. Elizabeth promised to support the girl on her path to the title. Helen reminded the lady that it was time for the ceremony. The girls walked together into the head of the family's apartment. The family heirloom was already waiting for its new owner. Stephanie confidently took the cane into her hands. Now she became the heir of the family. The main character looked at her friend with satisfaction, confident in the correctness of her plans. Morning came. It was time to begin work on restoring the castle. The Duchess thanked her former rival for her support. Stephanie no longer wanted to get married and be a princess. She had her own dreams and plans. The noblewoman, in turn, promised to help Elizabeth. The main character asked to share her knowledge of mineralogy, which greatly surprised her erudite friend. The Duchess was ready to help her ally in everything. The satisfied girls shook hands. Stephanie excused herself. She had to go get her paperwork and house in order. Elizabeth was about to return to the palace. Martha stood modestly waiting for her mistress. Ray was glad to be alive and also dreamed of a speedy return to his usual service. He told about what happened to the prince's chosen one after Kevin's fatal blow and how she turned into an immortal monster. The Duchess could not believe that vampires, long thought extinct, actually existed. Marta only had to confirm the young man's story. Stephanie thought about it. She knew that monsters were banned in the state and were subject to destruction. Suddenly, the conversation was interrupted by the appearance of the third prince with his assistants in the castle. Armando approached his chosen one and looked into her eyes. The pretender to the throne was aware of all the girls' plans and events in the castle. The main character was surprised by the prince's knowledge. Elizabeth tried to explain her goals, but the prince did not want to listen and ordered the girl to be sent to the palace. At Armando's order, his guard arrived. The main character still had plans in the castle, and she tried to resist. Marcel silently took the beauty in his arms. The young man said a few words to calm the girl down. The bodyguard knew how to influence his interlocutor. His phrases had a soporific effect. A few seconds later, Elizabeth was sleeping peacefully. The prince lingered to greet his bride. Stephanie informed her fiancé that, due to the death of the Duke and his last heir, the title had passed to her. Armando was surprised. No woman had ever become the head of the family before. The noblewoman shared the facts that the decision was made by her after receiving information about the causes of death of her mother and brother, and she herself committed the murder of her father. The girl was completely confident in her abilities to manage the duchy and run the family business. Stephanie took an oath of allegiance to her patron. The third prince generously blessed his new subordinate. The Duchess politely declined her status as a bride and asked to cancel the wedding. Armando was satisfied with the girl's proposal. He had no intention of marrying her. It interfered with his plans to ascend to the throne. As a token of gratitude, the young lady agreed to transfer half of her lands into the possession of the future heir to the throne. Everyone present was stunned by the generous offer. The prince became increasingly pleased with his collaboration with Stephanie. The girl promised to always support the gentleman. Armando was very interested in the idea of transferring lands. It strengthened his status. The pretender to the throne officially declared the Duchess his subject. Elizabeth slept peacefully. In her dreams, she was flying in white clouds and felt safe. The girl woke up feeling warmth throughout her body. She was lying in a cozy, fragrant pool with flower petals. The main character finally woke up. She was surprised by the beautiful surroundings and did not understand where she was and how long she had been sleeping. Nearby, Armando sat on a luxurious carpet in his house clothes. A beautiful stranger approached Elizabeth. It was Patricia, the mother of the third prince. The luxurious apartments belonged to the emperor's concubine, and it was here that the bodyguard was ordered to bring his mistress so that she could rest and hide from strangers. The girl thanked for the shelter. She was very worried about her friend and wanted to go to Stephanie's castle again. Armando insisted on his chosen one's temporary stay at his mother's residence. The main character perceived this as house arrest and did not understand the reason. The young man tried to explain to the girl that it would be safer for her to spend time away from people until it became clear what had happened to her and how she had managed to be resurrected. Patricia promised to help the guest and conveyed news from the Duchess. In the letter, Stephanie said that she had started restoring the castle and asked not to worry about her. Elizabeth calmed down a little. Now she was sure that her ally was doing well. The prince's mother turned out to be a very erudite woman. She asked the girl to tell about her time travels and reincarnations. The concubine revealed that the main reason for staying in her palace was the red eye, which was a sign of vampires, and they were banned in the state and subject to destruction. Patricia knew a way to neutralize the monster's properties, but the sealing process took time. The main character remembered all her deaths. Armando's mother managed to collect and restore the swords for the girl. Elizabeth thanked him for the gift. As it turned out, the blades chose their owner themselves. Only in this way could they act at full strength. The main character felt the warmth of her weapon again. The maid brought another message from the castle. In the distant duchy, life was gradually getting better. Stephanie told us about all the latest events on the estate. The girls from Elizabeth's squad stayed in the castle and helped restore it. The old Duke and Kevin were buried in the family cemetery. Grace was the one who mourned her stepbrother the most, even though she did not support his plans for Stephanie. The young lady completely changed the atmosphere in the castle. The new owner began to study various sciences. The Duchess wrote that she was dreaming of having tea with her best friend again. The stunning news was at the end of the letter. Stephanie had bought Elizabeth an estate near the castle. The main character was very happy about her ally's success. Patricia noticed how the guest's face changed. She was beaming with happiness. The girl was not used to resting and really wanted to act. The owner of the apartment was happy to help, but it would take about 3 more days to complete the neutralization. The second prince was sitting alone in his residence when his assistant appeared. The young man brought news from the duchy. Jackson was surprised by the sudden death of the head of the family and its last heir. Even more shocking was the news that Stephanie herself had accepted the title. The heir to the throne suspected that his younger rival and his chosen one were the instigators of change. Unexpectedly, the first princess and her maids decided to visit her brother. Jackson had to feign joy at the sight of Charlotte. The girl was bored and walked around the palace. The prince tried to unravel the secret plan behind his elder sister's visit. The princess made some cakes and brought them to treat her brother. After the uninvited guest left the room, Jackson ordered his security to inform him in advance of Charlotte's movements and not to let her in without warning. The assistant was ordered to throw away the sweets kindly brought by the girl. The princess was not a contender for the throne, but the prince always feared for his life. Patricia's residence was cozy and calm. Elizabeth understood that by accepting her into her home, her hostess was risking her life. The lady spoke about the peculiarities of the time to which the policewoman was transported. In the mysterious world, besides humans, there were 4 other species. The main character had already met werewolves and magicians. There were 2 more categories that were extremely dangerous: demons and vampires. They were banned and destroyed. It was believed that they had all been eliminated a long time ago. Patricia told her story. She really wanted her son to become the head of state, but he had a cunning and ruthless competitor, his older brother. The owner of the house said that according to data from ancient books, which were also banned and destroyed long ago, vampires are practically immortal and very strong. The main character was saved by Stephanie's erudition and reading, which was able to bring her back to her sanity. The red bloody eye was the only reminder of the events in the castle. Elizabeth suggested that Patricia was risking her life to help her, so that in the event of a power struggle, she could use her fantastic abilities in the future. The lady did not hide her intentions. She needed the support of the immortal vampire, so she decided to seal the monster's magical power. The main character could not even imagine what awaited her in the near future, but she continued to make her plans.